This story began with archaeological excavations of mysterious ruins. No one could have imagined that during their research, people would touch an ancient seal, which would lead to a catastrophe for all of humanity. The bloody fog quickly spread across the cities, and anyone caught in its area of influence could not withstand the mutation, went mad, and died. In contrast, most other living creatures were transformed into terrifying, creepy, and endowed with strange abilities. They became known as the Scarlet Monsters. Humanity faces a serious threat of destruction. Where the scarlet beasts appeared, cities turned into ruins. The monsters united in groups and hunted people. Fear spread across the land like a plague. People fought this disaster in ways that were familiar and habitual to them. They dropped bombs into contaminated areas to stop the spread of the fog. However, there was a person who was able to survive the mutation. He had a goal that he strove towards with all his might. The monsters were not scary to him, since the life of his loved one was at stake. After the mutation, the guy himself looked little like a human. He rushed at the monsters without a shadow of fear. The guy destroyed the monsters one after another, getting closer to his goal. Due to the mutation, his arms seemed to be covered in red armor with sharp, long claws. When the monsters were dealt with, the boy stopped to catch his breath. The mutated hand glowed more because it had been soaked in the blood of monsters. At some point, somewhere in the destroyed buildings, a rumble was heard. The boy turned towards the sound, trying to figure out where it was coming from. His eyes glowed with a bright red light. The guy moved towards the sound, hoping to meet Xiao. Seeing something on the ground, the guy rushed forward. Coming closer, he saw only a doll. The boy reached out to the toy and lightly touched it with his mutated hand. However, he did not decide to take it with that hand, and after a second, his hand acquired its former, human appearance. Bloody tears streamed from the boy's eyes, and he asked his sister to forgive him for being late. It seemed like there wasn't a single living soul left in the ruined city. There was only one question spinning in the boy's head. Where did his sister go? We flash back 3 days and see a major traffic jam caused by the appearance of red fog. The news warned citizens not to leave their homes unless absolutely necessary, but many were already rushing to work and were unable to return due to traffic jams. The main character, Hao, with short, unruly black hair, was driving somewhere in a car with his family. The guy fell asleep after being stuck in traffic for a long time, but was awakened by a soldier knocking on the window demanding that he immediately get off the road. The father of the family said that politicians were to blame for all this, who had been reporting since the morning that a natural disaster was approaching. But this was clearly far from the truth. Hao looked around and realized that the entire street was filled with soldiers who were trying to clear the road of civilian cars. Hao's younger sister Xiao clung to her brother and said she was scared, and he smiled at her and tried to reassure her. After a few moments, the street became too noisy, which attracted the guy's attention. A red fog began to thicken in the sky, causing panic to grow among citizens and military personnel. Hao looked around with interest, trying to make out this strange fog, which he had never seen before. An explosion occurred on one of the bridges, which threw a car over the fence. Right under the bridge at that moment, the Hao family's car was parked. The guy only managed to scream and cover his sister with himself. The car fell from the bridge right onto the hood of the Hao family's car. The boy escaped with a few scratches from the broken car windows, but all his attention was focused on his parents sitting in the front. His mother clung to his father in fear, who said his leg was crushed. Suddenly all their attention turned to the street, from which came screams and loud rumbles. The whole family immediately became alarmed and looked around. Hao saw what was happening behind him and froze in horror. Not far from their car, a giant lizard appeared from the red mist, which was clearly not in a friendly mood. People ran in different directions in panic, and the military opened fire, trying to destroy the monster. Father Hao ordered his children to get away from the car immediately. Hao couldn't disobey his father, so a few moments later he kicked down the passenger door. The boy quickly got out of the car and his sister followed him. Hao tried his best to open the door on his mother's side, but he couldn't do it. At that moment, other monsters began to emerge from the fog, this time resembling giant wolves. Hao looked at them and realized that as soon as the monster dealt with its victim, its attention would fall on him and Xiao. Mom grabbed the boy by the hands and told him and his sister to leave immediately. Her father supported her and told Hao to take responsibility as a man and take care of his sister. The next moment, another monster appeared from the red mist. It fell like a meteorite on the Hao family's car, smashing it into pieces, and Hao and Xiao barely managed to jump out of the way. A large black wolf with a skeleton sticking out from under its fur growled loudly, turning its head towards the boy and girl. Tears welled up in Xiao's eyes as she realized that their parents were no longer there. The monster looked at Hao and Xiao for a while, grinning. Then he began to move slowly towards them, as if chasing prey. Xiu seemed not to notice the wolf. and kept rushing towards the car in which her parents' bodies were. Hao pulled his sister with all his might, taking her as far away from the monster as possible. More and more new monsters appeared in the city. Because of the flying monsters, planes fell, creating even more devastation in the city. The military began dropping bombs, but very quickly all the helicopters carrying ammunition were shot down. As he ran away, the boy noticed how strangely everyone was behaving because of the red fog. Animals turned into terrible monsters that immediately attacked everyone in sight. People who inhaled the red mist began to suffocate and soon fell dead. Due to the appearance of monsters and panic, the city began to collapse before our eyes. Hao thought that everyone around him was going crazy. The boy didn't understand what was happening, but he couldn't let go of his younger sister's hand for even a second. After some time, Hao and Xiao hid in one of the destroyed shops. However, the monster sensed them and slowly surrounded the only exit from the building. When the monsters entered the shop, Hao hid behind a shelf, hugging his sister and covering her mouth with his hand to keep her from screaming. The boy didn't choose this place by chance, because he and his sister would be able to take shelter in the store and would be provided with provisions until rescuers came for them. Hao carefully peeked out from behind the shelf and saw the monster moving towards the exit. The guy breathed a sigh of relief, letting go of his sister, but didn't notice how the red fog began to creep up on them. Suddenly, Xiu screamed in pain, and red streaks began to spread across her face. The girl grabbed her head and said that she felt very bad, thereby frightening her brother. There was a large mirror next to them, which is why he saw that the same thing was happening to his face as to his sister. Hao looked back and saw the red mist, thinking that this pain might be related to Xiao swallowing the mist. The guy grabbed a bottle of water from the shelf and wet his handkerchief with it. Hao applied a wet handkerchief to his sister's nose and mouth to prevent the fog from leaking out through her airways. However, the next moment, the guy's body was pierced by severe pain. He pressed himself to the ground and tried to fight the feeling that something was being torn out of his body. Xiao felt better and asked if Hao was okay, and the guy replied that everything was fine, hiding his shaking hand behind his back. Hearing the noise, the monster immediately changed its direction of movement and moved deeper into the store. The giant wolf slowly circled the shelves, trying to find the source of the noise. Hao was so distracted by the pain that he didn't notice that he was now visible from behind the shelf. Seeing the victim, the wolf bared his teeth and growled, attracting the attention of his fellows. Hearing the growl, Hao immediately turned around, but realized that they had already been noticed. The boy grabbed his sister by the hand, and they ran towards the exit of the store. Confusing the wolf between the shelves, the brother and sister got out of the store first. However, at that very moment, a winged monster landed next to them. Hao stopped, hiding behind Xiao's back. At that moment, the wolf emerged from the shop and crept up on them from behind. Xiao and Hao looked at each monster in turn. The boy hugged his sister and wondered why the monsters hadn't attacked them yet. The next moment, a loud roar was heard above their heads, emitted by a dragon-like monster. The force of his wing beats was enough to raise dust from destroyed buildings into the air. The monsters began to gather around the giant monster. He in turn landed next to Xiao and Hao, looming over them. Hao began to suspect that the giant monster was the leader, and thought that he and his sister were truly destined to die today. Running around the big wolf, the brother and sister rushed back to the store. Hao grabbed the board and told Xiao that it was much more dangerous outside, so they had no choice but to fight the smaller monsters inside the building. The guy was preparing himself to believe that he was fighting just a mad dog. However, the monster bit through the stick on the first blow, leaving Hao without a weapon. The wolf rushed at the boy, who did not understand why this creature was so fierce. The monster pressed the resisting Hao against the wall and tried to bite him, but the guy pressed his feet and hands against his jaw. A few moments later, an arrow flew into the wolf's eye, forcing the monster to step aside. Not far from Hao stood his sister, holding a crossbow in her hands, which she had found in the store. However, it was too early to relax, because the monster quickly came to its senses and attacked Xiao. Hao wanted to help his sister, but he realized that the wolf was much closer to the girl than he was, so he told her to run. The guy told Xiao not to turn around under any circumstances. Hao was about to follow the monster, but pain shot through his body again, causing him to cough up blood. The guy grabbed his chest and his whole body was shaking. The monster was rapidly catching up with Xiao and was already looming over her. The girl caught her foot on the food scattered on the floor and fell, screaming in pain. Seeing this, Hao's hand clenched, smashing the concrete wall into pieces. Before the monster could grab Xiao, a concrete wall fell on the wolf, pinning him to the floor. Hao, fuming with anger, jumped onto the wall with a metal pipe in his hands and said that no one dared touch his sister. After that, the guy stuck the pipe into the monster's head. Even though the wolf was killed, Hao continued to strike one blow after another, which greatly frightened his sister. The girl ran up to her brother and tried to pull him back, begging him to stop. Hao gradually began to calm down, listening to Xiao's trembling voice. The moment when his mother said goodbye to him near the car flashed before the boy's eyes. Hao remembered the faces of his parents, who accepted their fate and sent them on their way with smiles on their faces. The guy knew that they would always be with them, wherever they were, so he and Xiao should always be together. Through these thoughts, Hao heard his sister's voice trying to calm him down. When the boy froze in place, Xiao raised her head and looked at her brother's eyes, which were now the same as always. Hao smiled and said that everything was fine now and the girl didn't have to worry about him. She stood with her back to the window, and moving further away, Hao saw a winged monster approaching them from the street. Before the monster broke through the window, the guy managed to grab Xiao and run away with her to the side. Having flown into the room, the creature turned towards the guy and girl, who were running into the depths of the store. Sending his sister forward, Hao grabbed the metal pipe again. The boy ordered her to stay away from his sister and struck the monster in the face. With one blow, Hao was able to throw the large monster into the opposite wall. The guy himself froze in place, not understanding where such monstrous strength came from. The monster was defeated in one blow, which could not help but worry. Hao told his sister to hide in the store while he dealt with the rest of the monsters. Xiao wanted to resist, but the guy said that the leader of the monsters had already noticed them, so it would not be possible to leave just like that. The sister hugged Hao again and said that if she left, the boy might lose control again. The brother patted Xiao on the head and told her not to worry, because this time he would definitely control himself. Hao asked the girl to wait for him here and promised that he would soon sort everything out and come back for her. Xiao demanded that her brother promise her that he would definitely return alive. Hao promised that no matter what, he would return for his sister alive. The red fog outside began to thicken more and more over the store. Soon Hao emerged from it, his body surrounded by a red glow. The guy said that he felt like by killing monsters and absorbing their blood energy, he became stronger. Looking at the leader of the monsters, Hao said that he had much more of this energy. The guy was confident that if he could kill this monster, he would gain enough power to protect his family. A mocking grin appeared on the leader's face, and steam came out of his mouth. Several wolves at the same time headed towards Hao, who was disappointed that he was not being seen as a worthy opponent. Having killed the wolf standing closest, the boy said that he would kill everyone who stood in his way. Hao dealt one blow after another, making his way towards the leader of the monsters. One of the wolves crept up behind him and sank its long teeth into his shoulder. At that moment, Hao's hands turned red and seemed to be covered in armor, allowing him to tear the wolf apart. It seemed that the guy had once again lost control from the power that was overwhelming him. At that moment, a military plane flew over the street, which attracted the attention of the leader of the monsters. The monster soared into the sky and roared so loudly that the buildings began to shake. At that moment, the monsters began to run away in different directions, leaving Hao alone. Because of this, the guy began to slowly come to his senses and noticed his hands, which no longer looked human. A bright flash in the sky caught his attention, and Hao was able to spot a projectile that had been dropped in his direction from a military plane. Xiao peeked out from her hiding place, but Hao shouted at her to hide immediately. At that moment, a powerful explosion occurred, which destroyed several more buildings nearby. After some time, the helicopter flew over the destroyed city and collected the wounded residents. After finding Hao, the military abandoned him, as he was already infected. But they did not notice any signs of infection on Xiao, so they took her away. Half asleep, Hao saw the soldiers dragging his sister's unconscious body into the helicopter. The boy could only watch as the helicopter soared into the sky and carried Xiao away. Hao only had the strength to raise his hand towards the helicopter. Much time had passed since that day, but Xiao came to her brother in his dreams almost every day. Each time, the girl burned in the flames and asked why her brother never came to save her. No matter how hard Hao tried, he couldn't reach his sister. It even seemed to him that the closer he got to her, the more she suffered from the flames that emanated from his mutated hands. Hao woke up from the horror and found himself reaching forward with his hand. The guy rubbed his head and said that more than 6 months had passed since his sister's disappearance. Hao picked up his rifle and said it was a miracle he hadn't been discovered yet. On the day Xiao was taken away by those people in the helicopter, the guy searched all the local refugee camps. However, no matter where he looked, he could not find a single trace of his sister. To find Xiao, Hao joined the lowest ranks of the army, the border patrol, and became a private soldier. In such troubled times, only the army has the right to gather information and move freely. Hao joined the border outpost of Chishi City, and Jia Jun became his captain. At this moment, Hao approached the captain and apologized for being late for his shift. The other soldiers reacted negatively to the fact that the recruit was late again. The captain gave Hao a kick in the ass and asked where the guy had been hanging out all this time. As Hao climbed the stairs to the observation deck, the captain announced that important guests would arrive in a little while, and that they would then be able to finish their service. Jun warned that if the guy caused any trouble, he would be in trouble. Hao climbed to the observation deck and saw the scarlet tower that had appeared in the city 6 months ago, bringing with it a scarlet mist and many monsters. The remaining survivors are forced to hide within the borders, away from the tower and the fog, just to save their lives. Looking at the tower, Hao only had one question. Was the giant monster he and Xiao had encountered on the first day still there? The captain said that there were special combat units outside, so their patrol was just for show and didn't serve any particular purpose. The squad members were confident that the famous Special Counterforce Squad would not be defeated, so there was no need to worry about it. The soldiers recall stories of elite fighters who had been slaying demons all the way to them. According to the stories, this did not cause them any particular difficulty. Sitting at his post, Hao thought about how he had never gotten used to the smell of the scarlet mist that awakened a primal thirst for blood in living beings. At some point, the familiar picture in front of the guy began to change as the fog began to clear. However, I immediately realized that this was due to something breaking through to their post. The soldiers sitting below also noticed something was wrong and alerted the captain. It soon became clear that the fog was not dissipating, but was making its way into the outpost in a thick stream. Through the fog, the soldiers noticed a special detachment breaking through the fog. Running up to the soldiers, they shouted for everyone to run back immediately. The captain stood there and could not understand what had happened and why the detachment had returned ahead of time. However, just a few moments later, something pulled the Special Forces fighters back into the fog. Jun snatched a radio from his pocket and gave the order to retreat. However, before he could escape, the monster grabbed him by the hood of his sweatshirt with its claw. Finding himself in the fog, the captain saw a lizard-like monster that was about to tear him to pieces. From his post, Hao could hear screams coming from the fog that enveloped their outpost. He heard people running away in panic and screaming in pain as they encountered the monsters. The guy didn't wait long and jumped from his post. Within 6 months, Hao had learned to control his new power, so he didn't worry about his safety. One of the monsters saw something fall from the sky and flinched. Hao landed on one of the monsters, killing it on the spot. The guy's hands turned red and became covered with protection. The creature did not wait for the man to take action and rushed forward. Hao didn't even intend to dodge and expected to collide with the monster face to face. With one movement, the guy tore off the creature's head without any problems. Putting his hand to the body of the defeated monster, Hao absorbed its powers. Having absorbed the powers of this creature, the guy grew a little stronger, and now he was interested in what would happen if he absorbed a few more. The monsters began to gather around him, and he counted about 6 opponents. Hao chuckled, and hoped that these creatures would not let him down, and would be useful to him. However, before the guy could engage in combat, a purple bolt rushed past him, killing one of the monsters. Hao immediately realized that the shooter was behind him. Turning around, he saw a girl with long white hair pulled back into a high ponytail. Her name was Sunju, and she was the captain of the Burning Blood traveling squad. Hao immediately realized who was standing in front of him, and realized that things were bad for him. Looking at his mutation-enhanced hands, the boy realized that he needed to get rid of this as quickly as possible. Sunju went forward and ordered her people to destroy everyone to the last one and leave no one alive. The masked soldiers immediately rushed forward, accepting the captain's order. They pointed their guns at Hao, who flinched in surprise. The guy raised his human hands again and said that he was a private in the patrol squad, but the order to shoot had already been given. A series of shots rang out and the monster standing behind Hao was destroyed. The guy froze in place, frightened by the fact that the soldiers were shooting at a target located behind him. The soldiers informed the captain that the target had been destroyed. Without letting go of his hands, Hao turned around and saw the monster that was the squad's target. Sunju in turn moved closer to Hao. She turned to the guy and asked where his weapon was. Hao looked up at the girl and thought that his end had come. One of the soldiers meanwhile gave the order for all units to retreat from the front lines to a temporary defensive line. After some time, Sunja entered the main tent and forbade everyone from entering without her personal permission. Looking at the tablet with the report on the monster attack, the girl said that there were 37 dead at the forward outpost in Sector A. Hao looked at Sunja with tiredness and asked why she wouldn't let him go. The guy was tied up and seated on a chair in the center of the tent, even though he was the injured party. Sunju said that Hao left his post without permission for 2 hours, and immediately after his appearance, the blood fog attack began. The guy justified himself by saying that he had simply fallen asleep in the nearby ruins and immediately reported it to his captain. One soldier who was in the same squad with Hao reported that the guy was always late, and the commander always covered for him. Hao looked angrily at his former colleague, who turned away from him. Sunju touched her chin with her fingers and said that there were enough problems in the border detachment. At this time, the captain of the border detachment was in the hospital tent, but was no longer in critical condition. Looking at Hao's card, Sunju noted that the boy had only completed training 3 months ago, but still survived an attack that killed experienced fighters. The boy lowered his head and said that he had been involved in track and field at school, and as soon as he heard about the attack, he had been the first to run. Sunju asked what purpose Hao had in joining the army if he was so afraid of death. The guy thought about how, in search of Xiao for these 6 months, she had been constantly exterminating low-level monsters, absorbing their power. Gradually he learned to control his transformation into a beast and his return to human form. For 6 months, Hao lived like a lone wolf, avoiding people and using the most primitive methods to comb through every ruin in search of a human settlement. Sunju again distracted the guy from his thoughts, and said that he, being a military man, values his life above all else, and had left the unit without permission, concealing information. The girl came closer to the guy and asked if he understood what his actions would lead to. Hao immediately realized that the girl was threatening to shoot him for desertion. Sunju leaned towards the guy and whispered to him what was wrong with his hands. The girl asked why Hao was making up all these lies and what his true goal was. At that moment, a roar was heard from the street. Sunju thought an earthquake had started, but Hao had experienced these feelings before. The guy jumped up from his chair and told everyone to run away, because a huge number of monsters were approaching them. Sunju was very angry that the guy dared to try to run away right in front of her. The girl quickly caught up with Hao and, jumping on his back, pushed his face into the floor. Perhaps due to the force of the impact, or due to the influence of something from the outside, cracks began to spread across the floor. Within a few moments, the floor began to collapse, dragging Sunja, Hao, and 2 other soldiers down with it. They fought against the collapse for a long time, but soon everything stopped and became quiet. Sunju stood up first and began to examine the place where they found themselves. Hao looked up and realized that the collapse had trapped them underground. Sunju told a soldier named Wei to prepare lighting because it was too dark in the cave. A soldier named Shun, who had previously been in the same squad as the prisoner, said that all of this happened because of Hao. Wei took out a small pocket flashlight and turned it on, illuminating the cave. Shun looked back and noticed in horror that they were in an underground labyrinth dug by monsters. Sunju ordered everyone to remain calm and check their weapons. The girl ordered them to keep in line and not to turn their backs to anyone. At that moment, a rumble began to be heard from one of the tunnels. The guy turned in that direction and said that he heard something in this tunnel. Jun thought it might be the sound of the wind, meaning that there was an exit waiting for them at the other end of the tunnel. The soldier came closer to one of the passages and said that there really was a draft of air coming from there, and praised Hao for his escape skills. Ignoring the sounds behind him, Jun hurried to notify the captain of his discovery. At the last moment, Sunju fired and killed the monster that was lurking behind Shun. The monster spat out saliva, which began to burn through the floor, and the girl warned that the liquid from these beetles was poisonous, so one should not go near them. Sunju came closer and reminded Shun that it was forbidden to act without her order. Shun was so scared that he could only agree with the girl with a trembling voice. Sunju looked at Hao and said that the guy was very good at avoiding danger, and he still had to explain this to her personally. The guy understood that the girl already knew his secret, but he didn't understand why she hadn't said anything directly yet. Suddenly, a roaring sound began to come from all the passages, indicating that the monsters were approaching. Within moments, the spacious cave was filled with monsters. These creatures resembled giant mutated ants in their way of life. Hao looked around and realized that things were really bad now, because there were too many monsters for the 4 of them. The next moment the monsters rushed to attack. Only Wei and Sunju had weapons, so only they could shoot back. Jun and Hao ran between them, following the captain into one of the passages. Hao stopped periodically and looked back, but Sunju told him to run forward. Then the girl realized why the guy had stopped and noticed that the entire swarm had frozen in place. After some time, the team came out into an even more spacious cave, from which many tunnels led. Soon they noticed something ahead. A lord-level monster appeared before them, controlling the swarm and absorbing the red mist. This monster was huge and looked like an armadillo beetle, with long, sharp legs. Hao realized things were bad for them when the creature began to convert the red mist into energy. Hao shouted to the rest of the squad that this creature was very dangerous. Sunju immediately took out her rifle and pointed it at the lord. A volley of purple energy, accompanied by lightning, erupted from the weapon. The monster also fired a volley of red energy in response. The volleys passed each other within a few centimeters of each other, rushing towards their targets. The purple lightning easily hit the monster's head, but did not cause much damage. However, the volley of red mist was rapidly approaching Sunja, who did not have time to react and dodge. Hao couldn't wait any longer and, transforming his hand, put it under the volley. Sunju stepped back a little, carefully watching the guy's actions. When the volley was absorbed, the guy began to transform his second hand, and Sunju wanted to ask him something. Hao interrupted her, giving all his attention to the monster standing in front of him. The guy promised that he would explain everything to the girl when they got out of here alive. Sunju wished Hao good luck, and thought that he really did have some abilities, since even her attack had no effect on the Overlord. The guy smiled and accepted the girl's wish, preparing for the fight. The next moment, Hao rushed at the monster, raising his clawed hand to strike. The guy understood that now he would encounter a monster that was similar in level to the one he met with Xiao on the first day of the arrival of the Red Fog. Hao struck the monster's shell several times but failed to penetrate its armor. The boy wondered how much stronger he could become if he absorbed this Overlord. Hao landed to the side of the monster, wondering what he should do against it. The guy understood that an ordinary monster would have long ago been blown to pieces by his attacks. Hao compared the Overlord to a huge armored tank. The guy suggested that the monster's strength was due to the fact that it had eaten quite a few of its own kind. The Overlord turned around and struck with a spike at the place where Hao had stood just a second ago. The guy managed to jump to the side and said that it was too slow. Hao guessed that the monster had channeled all its power into defense, which was why its attacks weren't as powerful. The guy concentrated all the power-ups in his hand and called the Overlord a simple walking target. While he was fighting the monster, the rest of the squad fired at the Overlord from behind, trying to penetrate the armor on his back. Jun couldn't believe that Hao, who always ran the fastest and feared death the most, was so strong. The soldier could not even imagine who he actually ended up with in the detachment. Sunju said that Hao was an experimental fighter secretly created by the government to fight monsters. The girl said that she only found out about this when the guy protected her from the Overlord's attack. Wei had never heard of such an experiment, but as Sunju's subordinate, he didn't question her words. Jun suggested that the very first Red Fog attack could be related to Hao's escape from the lab, and the girl said that she came specifically to check this. Sunju turned to the soldier and said that this was a government secret, so everything they saw here must remain a secret. Meanwhile, Hao continued to fight the Overlord, who began using red mist charges as attacks. The guy easily dodged them, but he forgot that he was not alone in the cave. By the time Hao remembered this, it was already too late. A volley of energy flew at Sunja, Wei, and Jun, who were unable to defend themselves in any way. The next moment, a volley of energy crashed into the ground. Gradually, the dust that had risen into the air began to disperse, and it became clear that Sunju had managed to dodge the attack by jumping to the side. Shun was shaking with fear, but he knew he was still alive. The guy realized that it was Wei who pushed him aside. However, Wei's leg was badly injured, but he said that one leg for one life was a pretty good exchange. The guy said that he became a soldier not to kill monsters, but to save people's lives. Wei said that the last shield of humanity cannot be abandoned by any person. Meanwhile, Hao continued to fight the Overlord, but his strength was already at its limit, so the monster was able to throw him aside. The beast transformation began to dissipate, and his hands began to take on human features, which was bad. Now the guy understood what level the Overlord of the monsters really was, and that he would have to tinker with him. The monster was about to strike again with its spikes. Before the attack could reach Hao, purple lightning struck his head again, forcing him to retreat. This gave Hao the opportunity to crawl back a little. The guy immediately realized that Sunju was involved in this, and turned around. The girl held her rifle at the ready and said that Hao could not die here, because there were still too many things he had to explain. It seemed that Sunju's charge had pierced the armor, but the Lord remained alive, and even laughed at the people's attempts. Sunju froze in place and couldn't believe what was happening. The girl noticed that the monster was attracting red mist towards itself. Thanks to the branching passages, the Lord can easily move the red fog to different places. With the help of the fog, the monster easily heals all its wounds and restores its strength. The girl began to suspect that the sudden appearance of the red fog at the outpost was also the work of the Overlord. Sunju ran up to Hao and said that they couldn't defeat this monster and told him to retreat, but the guy was determined. The guy said that the red fog summoned by the Overlord would help him restore his strength, so now was the best time to attack. Sunju said that if they failed, everyone here might die. Hao said that he had already stood at the very gates of hell countless times. Now it doesn't matter to him whether it's one more or one less time. Sunju gave up and reloaded her rifle, saying they would only have one chance. The girl took aim and said that she would release all her strength and help Hao break through the Overlord's head shell, and the guy would have to destroy his brain. Sunju said that this was their only chance to defeat the monster. Taking aim, the girl shouted to Hao, calling him to action, and fired. The guy immediately rushed forward, following the volley of purple lightning. This blow again pierced the shell on the monster's head, and before it could recover, Hao flew up after it. The guy struck the very center of the hole in the shell, holding himself on the monster's head. After that, he began to strike one blow after another, making his way through the flesh to the brain itself. The Lord's blood was green and splashed in all directions. At some point, cracks appeared on his head, as if his head was about to explode. Sunju watched from the sidelines as things happened, trying to figure out if she and Hao had succeeded. The next moment, the monster's head exploded, throwing the guy aside. Hao fell to the ground and Sunju immediately rushed to his side. The guy was lying on the ground and didn't move, which greatly worried the girl. A photograph emerged from Hao's jacket breast pocket and caught Sunju's attention. She carefully took it out and looked at it, intending to save it for the guy. She was completely unaware that Hao had a black crystal in his hand. This crystal was saturated with red mist and began to penetrate the guy's body. Hao felt as if he had entered some space in which there was only him and the red mist. For a moment the boy thought that he had died in this battle. Hao saw next to him huge threads that looked like DNA, but they emitted a red glow. The guy reached out to his chest and saw a black crystal that seemed to have grown into his body, becoming one with it. Hao immediately recognized the thing he had taken out of the Lord's body. This crystal was like an energy formation. But the guy didn't understand how it ended up in his chest, if just a couple of moments ago, it was in his hand. The crystal began to glow and draw in the red mist that filled the space. Hao realized that this thing not only collected the mist, but also stored it within itself, which meant that the boy would have more opportunity to turn into his beast form without losing control. However, the guy's joy did not last long, because having absorbed too much energy, the crystal began to crack. Hao couldn't stop absorbing the red mist and began to worry that the crystal would explode right in his chest. The guy remembered that the giant beetle's intake consumed a huge amount of red mist. Hao decided to try to concentrate the energy into a sphere, as the Overlord had done before. In reality, the guy had been lying in a hospital bed for a long time, and a red fog began to appear around his unconscious body. Hao opened his eyes abruptly and realized that energy was bursting out of him. The guy put his hand forward and a sphere of red mist began to form on his palm. At that moment, Sunju entered the room and asked what the guy was doing. The sphere rushed towards the girl. Hao was thrown back on the bed, and he only had time to shout at her to move away. The next second, a powerful explosion thundered, which pierced the wall of the multi-story building in which Hao was currently located. We are transported to 5 minutes before the explosion. Zun followed Songju and regretted what happened to Wei's leg, but the girl replied that the boy had been prepared for this when he rushed to defend himself. As soon as the girl entered the room, Wei asked what was going on with Hao, as he had never heard of the government conducting such experiments before. Sunju took the tablet from the guy and said that it was top-secret information, but Wei didn't need to worry about it and should focus on treatment. The girl said that she had already submitted a request to headquarters to transfer the guy to a rear unit, so from now on he can rest. Wei said that he would report everything to Sunju's father, Chief of Staff Liang, and then he would judge everything himself. The girl got angry and reminded him that she was his direct commander, which meant that Wei would now be locked in the room without communication. Leaving the guy alone, Sunju asked Shun to take her to Hao's ward. Soon they reached room number 314. Sunju gave the order to guard the door and not let anyone in without her permission. The girl did not expect that danger was lurking behind the door. As soon as she looked into the room, Hao directed a sphere of red mist at her. It was clear that the guy was frightened by Sunju's sudden appearance. The girl recoiled as the sphere flew towards her. Hao shouted at her to move away and flew back himself. Sunju barely managed to duck, and the sphere flew over her head. The charge grew larger with each passing moment, and its sudden appearance knocked Shun, who was standing outside the door, off his feet. The sphere flew through the entire building, destroying everything in its path, and even the neighboring building was pierced through. It seemed that nothing could stop this discharge, as it destroyed everything in its trajectory. Wei couldn't help but see this from the window of his room and wondered how long Sunju could hide Hao from the others. Jun pressed himself to the floor and was indignant that all the misfortunes were befalling him and begged for help, because he did not want to die so early. Sunju immediately remembered that the Overlord used this technique, and was surprised that Hao could use it without any equipment. The girl frowned and turned to the guy, saying that he would have a lot to explain to her. To make sure no one could overhear them, Sunju took the guy to the roof of the hospital. After some time, Hao explained to her that he could not only absorb the cores of monsters, but also adopt their abilities. The guy said that he can also absorb the red mist and accumulate it, and the crystal in his chest restores itself. Sunju smiled and said that the guy had more than enough functions. Hao said that he had indeed received the power and abilities of the monsters, but there was a possibility that he himself would gradually turn into one of their kind. The guy asked if someone like him could be considered a real person, and asked Sunju's opinion on this matter. The girl said that Hao is unique in his kind, and whether he is a monster or a human depends on how the guy uses his power. Sunju came closer and said that the guy's strength was both a disaster and a weapon, which meant he only had two paths. The girl said that the first option was that Hao should enter the Burning Blood and become a candidate for her squad. The second option was to admit that one was a danger to society and be subject to destruction. Hao repeated the second scenario once again. Looking at the destroyed building next door, the boy asked if Sunju really thought the city army was capable of doing this. The girl agreed with him and said that at the moment she really couldn't do anything with him. Sunju said that if Hao joined her squad, she would be able to cover him from all problems, and he would have access to information. The guy thought for a moment and said that the girl must have some other goal if she was so eager to get him as a recruit. Sunju admitted that Hao was very smart, so she really needed him for certain reasons. The girl asked the guy to believe that they were not enemies. Sunju showed the photograph she took from the guy's breast pocket and said that this would be their deal. Hao immediately grabbed his pocket and confirmed that the photograph of him and his younger sister was gone. Sunju told him that he shouldn't underestimate her, and if he did join her squad, she would do everything possible to find his sister. Hao understood that he couldn't achieve anything on his own, but if he gained a higher status in the army, he would have more opportunities. The guy took the photo from Sunju and agreed to join her squad. Hao asked with a smile if he would get a raise, since all his money had gone towards finding his sister. Sunju said that she was appointing the boy as a candidate for the detachment and awarding him a salary at the highest rate, and he, in turn, should go fill out the paperwork right now. Hao saluted the captain and said that he would immediately go to the patrol department to hand over the case. Sunju stopped the guy and said that she paid compensation for the damage to the hospital out of her own pocket. However, the girl advised him not to rejoice prematurely, since she would deduct the entire amount from his salary. After some time, Hao arrived at the headquarters building of the patrol squad in the city of Chishi. The guy was surprised that Sun went with him. Jun proudly said that Captain Sunju and Adjutant Wei were very pleased with him, so they sent him to the rear department. Hao thought that he couldn't remember the guy's name at all because he had never been interested in it before. Shun suddenly raised his hand and said that he saw Captain Jia, who used to be their commander. The man's left arm and right leg were still bandaged, but he could now move independently with the help of a crutch. However, Captain Jia was now surrounded by soldiers, and one of them was accusing him of having been slapped in the past by a man because of a mute woman. The commander of the Chishi city garrison, Jiang Shi, was dissatisfied, and he struck Jia, calling him a beaten dog asking for help. Jun could not stand the insults directed at his former commander, and attacked Jiang Shi with his fists. Before the boy could get close to the commander, the soldiers grabbed him and pinned him face down to the ground. Jiang Shi just chuckled and ordered Captain Jia to kneel down and lick the dirt off his boots. The man began to threaten that otherwise he would break Shun's arm and make a crutch out of it. Jia didn't want his subordinates to be touched, so he resigned himself to the fact that he was a nobody in this place. Despite his broken leg, the man began to kneel. However, Hao was at his side in an instant and didn't let him fall to the ground. The guy said that the captain had helped him a lot before, so now it was his turn to repay the kindness. Hao turned to the soldiers and said that if anyone in his presence dared to insult Captain Jia, he would deal with them immediately. These words greatly angered Jiang Shi's subordinates, and they grabbed the weapons at hand. Grabbing some metal pipes lying nearby, the soldiers rushed at Hao. The guy had no intention of going back on his words and was ready to answer. He ducked, dodging the first two blows and making his way towards the soldiers standing behind him. With one kick, he knocked out one of his opponents. He then turned and hit the other soldier in the chin with his elbow. While the rest of the opponents watched everything that was happening with confusion on their faces, Hao dealt one blow after another. It only took him 4 hits to deal with all the soldiers. The last guy was thrown into the wall by the force of the blow, breaking through it with his body. 4 soldiers were now lying on the ground, shaking in pain, and some were completely unconscious. Jiang Shi and the rest of the people did not dare to approach Hao. The soldiers shouted that the guy would get into trouble if he got involved with their commander. But Jiang Shi himself was shocked that Hao had dealt with his men in just 4 seconds. The man pulled out a gun and pointed it at the boy, asking if he understood who he was challenging. Hao easily dodged the bullets, and said that he understood everything perfectly. The guy ran up to Jiang Shi and snatched the gun from his hands, saying that the man was shooting too slowly. Hao easily crushed the pistol in his hand, which shocked the commander even more. The guy said it wasn't even close to the speed of Sunju's shots. Jiang Shi couldn't bear this humiliation and pulled out a knife, rushing at Hao. However, this time too, the guy easily stopped his hand. Throwing the knife aside, Hao lifted Zhang Shi by the neck and asked if the man really wanted to force Captain Jia to his knees. Zhang Shi felt his life was in danger and warned Hao that this would not go without consequences. The guy only said that now it was the commander's turn to carry out his own orders. After this, Hao slammed Zhang Shi's body into the ground with all his might, causing it to crack. The commander immediately lost consciousness, and for a few moments everyone was quiet. After this, the street was filled with the surprised voices of soldiers who could not believe that Hao had dodged the bullets and crushed the standard pistol with such ease. The boy looked at his hand and noted that the power he had gained by strengthening his body with the beast's core was beyond all expectations. The soldiers grabbed their captain and ran away in fear, calling Hao a monster. The guy didn't pay any attention to them and picked up Captain Jia's crutch from the ground. Shun ran up to Hao and said that he was amazed by his strength, and Hao responded by asking if the guy was okay. Captain Jia approached and thanked Hao for his help, but he replied that there was no need to thank him for that, since the man had been helping him all the time. However, the captain was worried that the garrison detachment might now begin to pursue the guy, but Zun reassured him. The guy said that now he and Hao were members of a special squad, and the garrison wouldn't dare do anything to them. By evening, Hao arrived to report to the temporary base of the special detachment in the city of Chishi. Sunju looked at the report and said that all the formalities had been completed, and she had already sent Hao's application to join the general headquarters. The girl showed the guy a screen that indicated that the application had been accepted, and the guy had been scheduled for an entrance exam. Hao was delighted, and asked if he was now a full member of the squad. But Sunju replied that the real test still awaited him. The girl said that the boy should go to the headquarters in Hucheng City and pass the entrance exam for the combat unit of the special squad Flameblood. However, Sunju was confident that this would not be difficult for the guy, and Hao promised that he would set a new record during the test. Following Songju's order, Hao headed to the city of Hucheng. They set off with the entire team, a whole line of cars. Sunju, Shun, and Hao were riding in the same car. The girl said that they had arrived at the government capital and that this was where the headquarters of the Flameblood was located. Hao said that the official Flameblood fighters were at least D-class warriors, but he had never encountered the class distribution before. The guy pointed at Jun and asked how he could possibly pass such a serious selection, being so weak. Sunju said that the boy joined the rear group, not the combat group, so he did not need to go through combat selection. Jun patted Hao on the shoulder and said that they would still fight together, so the guy still had to count on him. Sunju interrupted them and told Hao that warriors like her, who can use superpowers, are called warriors. The headquarters has a special system that categorizes soldiers according to their combat capability into 6 ranks: S, A, B, C, D, E. Meanwhile, monsters are divided into 5 categories according to their strength level, and the simplest of them are hounds and scouts. After them come the lords, one of whom they had to fight not long ago. Following them are the giants, one of which Hao met on the first day of the appearance of the red fog. The most dangerous were the calamity-level monsters, which no one had yet managed to deal with. Typically, an E-class warrior can defeat a Scout-class monster, and warriors who can defeat a Hound-class monster are awarded a D-class. Warriors of Class B and C are equal to Overlord-level monsters. Class A can handle giant-level monsters, while Class S is for calamity-level monsters. Sunju also noted that the rank is influenced by the degree of compatibility with the monster's core. In the current world, only monsters mutated by the red fog have superpowers. Human warriors can only activate abilities through core armament, that is, through compatibility with monster cores. Suju said that compatibility with the core is influenced by physical fitness, talent, and luck. And the higher the compatibility, the better the quality of the awakened abilities will be. The girl said that if Hao's core was completely incompatible, then he would be given a maximum of E rank. Suzu stopped her car at a checkpoint and was told to go around since the street was currently closed. The girl asked why on earth they dared to stop a car with a special squad. The soldiers apologized, but insisted that they were on duty and therefore could not let anyone through. Sunju saw a white car with a pattern of green vines driving past. The girl wondered what the Green Vine Corporation was doing in this place. An hour later, they finally managed to get to the entrance examination venue, and the instructor brought them up to speed. Lin Yunxing, the chief examiner of the Flame Blood and Class A warrior, warned that he did not care about the contacts and backgrounds of the applicants, and that everyone would be selected fairly. The guy said that relying on connections in his selection process was absolutely unacceptable, so they could leave all their hopes outside the doors of this hall. Yunxing warned that if someone didn't have real strength, they should immediately forget about staying in the Flame Blood. The examiner said that the first test would be a physical fitness test. At the beginning, The candidates had to run 100 meters with a 50-kilogram load in a timed manner. Hao was the fastest and completed the distance in 5 seconds. After that, they raised the widths with electromagnetic amplification, which caused difficulties for many. However, Hao easily lifted 500 kilograms with one hand. The next part was a test of striking power, and unfortunately, Hao went first. With one blow he broke the device, and it was not possible to record the data. 10 minutes later, Hao stepped forward and reported to the chief examiner that all tests had been successfully passed. Yunqing confirmed the completion, and recorded the final score at 198 units. Everyone was shocked because the previous record was 140 points, which made everyone think that Hao was cheating. City Guard Captain Jin's younger brother approached Yongxing and reported that the previous record was 140 points. The guy noted that Hao's performance far exceeds this record, which raises certain doubts in him. Yunxin became angry and said that he personally carried out all the tests, which were recorded on video, so there was no reason to doubt his protection. Jin said that he did not blame the examiner for anything, but was simply curious. The guy passed by Hao and confirmed his identity. Jin said he just wanted to say hello to his fellow countrymen, but in reality, he was pursuing his own goals. He already knew how Hao had humiliated his older brother Jiang Shi, and he couldn't leave it like that now. Jin promised that he would make the guy pay double for his actions. Hao thought about the guy's words about them being fellow countrymen. Yunxin asked if the guy knew Jin, to which he received a negative answer. Hao learned from the examiner who Jin was, and realized that the city guard was already rotten to the bone. Yunxin began to announce the results of the physical test, naming the candidate's number on the list and his score. As expected, Hao took first place. Second place went to Jin Ying, a senior employee of the Scientific Bureau of Technical Intelligence, who initially came to the selection for fun. That same evening, in the solitary dormitory, Jin called his relatives. The guy was upset that he didn't take first place in the test, and 2 people beat him. Relatives said that if it weren't for Jin's older brother, he wouldn't have been able to get into the selection at all. The guy understood that he could not miss this opportunity, and must definitely join the fiery blood. The next day, animal cores were tested. All the candidates gathered in a room with several monitors and a large table. Yunxin said that this test is not difficult and only involves putting the bracelet on your hand. After this, the applicant must place the animal core in the center of the bracelet to check for compatibility. Yunxin said that those with compatibility below 40% are eliminated immediately. The man explained that only monsters of the hound level and above could generate a core, and the higher the monster's level, the higher the quality of the core. By inserting a beast core into a monster weapon, the warrior will be able to use abilities like the creatures themselves. Each person has their own compatibility with the animal core. Depending on compatibility and innate talent, different abilities are awakened, such as strength, element, support, or control. Yunxin said that the bracelet is the most primitive weapon of the monsters, but it will be able to demonstrate the level of compatibility. But after joining the squad, applicants will be given real weapons and cores. At this point, the examiner finished and announced the start of the animal core compatibility test. The first few applicants failed the exam, and even those with a compatibility percentage of 39% were excluded. One such guy fell to his knees and began cursing everything, because he was one of the best in the physical strength test. The candidates changed, and soon someone was found who passed the test and was awarded a D rank. The examiners watched the testing calmly and did not express any enthusiasm, which indicated that this level of compatibility was not unusual. Soon, Yunxing invited Jin to come to his table, which was very quiet that day. However, the guy's eyes burned with a red flame from anger and anticipation of reprisal against Hao. Jin put on the bracelet and suddenly grabbed the beast core. The guy abruptly inserted the core into the bracelet and squeezed it tightly. Jin was very angry and ordered the core to obey him. The screen showed 60% compatibility, which surprised all the applicants. No one had ever scored higher than 57%, suggesting that Jin might be the strongest contender this year. The guy was happy with this result and became more and more convinced that he was the best. Under the admiring glances, Jin moved away from the table and went to the far side of the room. Jinying peeked out from behind Hao and said that she had never heard of such a strong guy like him before. The girl said that she worked in the Technical Intelligence Bureau and knew about everything, so it was unusual for her that she still didn't know anything about Hao. Jinying suspects that the recent abnormal fluctuations in the concentration of the red mist may be related to the boy, but he tried to deny everything. The girl immediately saw through him and said that she understood everything anyway, so she didn't need any explanations. Hao smiled and called the girl a know-it-all, then asked permission to ask one question. Jinying agreed to answer him, but only on one condition. The girl said that she would tell Hao about everything, but only if his result was higher than hers. Jinying repeated once again that she would share absolutely everything with him, after which she was called in for testing. The girl happily ran to the table to determine the level of compatibility with the cores. Jinying raised her hand with the bracelet up and said that now she would break Jin's record. Hao wondered if the girl was really that strong. Jinying grabbed the beast core and looked at it with a smile. The girl twirled the cannonball in her hand several times, then inserted it into the bracelet. Even before the results were announced, the girl said that the compatibility would be 78%. The next moment, the screens confirmed her words and awarded her a D rank. The applicants began to scream loudly and doubt that the device was working properly. However, Jinying didn't pay attention to this and only smiled broadly at Hao. Without losing her spirit, the girl ran up to Jin and Hao and said that she had broken the record after all. Jin was extremely angry and promised himself that he would never forgive Jinying either. After that, Hao, who was last on the list, was called in for testing. The guy thought that Jinying was very strong and perhaps she wasn't lying about knowing everything. Hao was willing to try his best for a lead on his case, so he told the girl to watch carefully. Sunju had said earlier that the guy would be at least a C-class rank, and the core he had presented was the same color as the one he had absorbed recently. Fully confident of success, Hao inserted the core into the bracelet and froze in anticipation of the result. The guy raised his hand up and expected to see the size of his potential. The screen immediately showed that Hao had been awarded a C rank, which surprised everyone in the room. This rank was usually awarded to squad leaders. However, after a few moments, the device returned an error and began recalculating the kernel compatibility percentage. Everyone present in the hall froze in anticipation. At some point, Hao realized that everything was not going according to plan when the screen showed 0% kernel compatibility. Jin immediately began to mock the guy, calling him a loser. The guy said that even the beast core completely rejects Hao. The brunette only gave him an angry look, but he felt that something was wrong with the bracelet. The crystal began to penetrate the bracelet and sink into his body. Hao felt energy begin to fill his body, interacting with the new core. Jinying ran to the computer and said that it was amazing, because even the worst result had 1% compatibility. The girl said that she urgently needed to record this so that she could tell her old man about it later. Jin saw that the core had disappeared from the bracelet, and decided to take advantage of this to corner Hao. The guy told Yunshin that Hao had stolen the core, as it was no longer in the bracelet. The examiner demanded that the boy immediately raise his hand and show him the bracelet and the core. Hao complied, and everyone immediately saw that the core was no longer in the bracelet. Yunsin demanded a report from the guy about what happened, but Hao said that he himself did not understand anything. The guy urgently needed to come up with an excuse, otherwise he would definitely be used as a guinea pig. Hao decided to take a risk and began to thicken the red mist around himself, pretending that he was doing it unconsciously. The guy decided to stage the beast-like appearance as a manifestation of the core's power. After a few moments, Hao's hand took on a beast-like appearance, but he was in no hurry to let go. Even Jin was frightened and took a few steps back. Yongxing drew his beast dagger and ordered everyone to prepare for battle. Only Jinying looked at Hao's hand with interest and seemed not to feel any fear at all. Hearing the girl's words about beast formation, Jin thought that Hao was infected with the red mist. Yunsin, as the leader of this hall, ordered everyone to move away from the guy. The examiner knew they had little time to call for help, so he had to figure it out on his own. At this moment, Jinying called out to Hao, attracting his full attention. The guy looked at her calmly and asked what she wanted from him. Yongxing was dumbfounded and asked if Hao had really lost his mind. Hao assumed that this formation was the ability of the core itself, and therefore it penetrated his body on its own. Jinying hung on the guy's arm and said that such a transformation was one of a kind. Yongxing put away his weapon and said that Hao was very lucky, because self-healing had never occurred after beast formation. Ho looked at Jinying and asked how the girl knew so much about transformations. The girl smiled and reminded him that she was the main know-it-all. Yongxing patted Jinying on the head and said that she was the daughter of the head of the R&D department. The girl was outraged that the examiner revealed all her secrets. Yongxing said that it was time to end all of this and ordered Hao to give him the beast core. The guy rubbed his head and said that he really couldn't give up the core. Hao pointed to the bracelet and said that this thing had grabbed hold of his body and would not come out. Upon learning of this, Jin became even more angry. The guy was going to report this to the people from Green Vine as soon as possible, since Hao was the perfect experimental specimen. After some time, Yunqing reported what had happened to his superiors and took Hao to the isolation ward. Doctors sent the boy for a scan to find the nucleus that had fused with his body. The workers were shocked by this discovery and reported that the core could not be removed from the boy's body. By this time, Father Jinying had arrived at headquarters and was watching the examination with interest. A lab worker approached the man and asked what he thought about it. Ansheng replied that they still needed to examine Hao's body, as it probably contained many secrets. A few moments later, Yunxing entered the office with another man and asked what the examination results were, and who Hao really was. Ansheng only asked why Flameblood kept rejecting those with compatibility below 40%. Lieutenant General Song Lian, who came with Yongxing, asked the scholar to get down to business. Ansheng glanced at Hao and said that he personally developed this test in conjunction with Greenvine, so he knew that the guy's compatibility was not at all 0%. Jinying began shaking her father's hand, demanding that he finally get down to business and tell her everything. Ansheng said that when Hao tested the device, it went off scale, meaning its compatibility was unprecedented. The scientist was confident that compatibility exceeded the theoretical maximum of 100%. Songlian headed towards the exit and ordered Yongxin to follow him. Hao himself was thinking at that moment that his core had changed color from black to red, and wondered if it was due to the absorption of the last core. Previously, when absorbing cores, the guy simply gained their abilities, but now he strengthens his crystal core. In other words, the stronger the monster, the more powerful Hao will become after absorbing it, and his development will never stop there. Meanwhile, we are transported to the headquarters of the Burning Blood, to the Special Response Team. There at that moment, Sunju was trying to defend the right to take Hao into her squad. Songlian asked the girl to be mindful of her position and tone when she spoke to him, and pointed out that she was being too protective of the new recruit. Sunju told her father that she had promised to take this guy into her unit, and Songlian could not force her to break her word as a soldier. The man replied that a soldier's honor lies with the state, not with an individual. Songlian reported that Hao had already been accepted into Yongxin's squad, and that this could not be changed. The man hoped that his daughter would not take people away from her colleague, being the same commander of the Burning Blood Squad. Songlian said that this was not a request from a father, but an order from a commander, so the girl had no choice. Soon after, Hao was moved to a rest room in the Burning Blood camp. Jinying happily ran into the room and reported that they had found the beast's lair between Lake City and Redstone City, so the recruits were sent on a trip. The girl said that she had already made arrangements with instructor Yunsen and formed a team. Jinying and Hao went to Yongxing's office to receive direct instructions on the mission. The commander ordered reconnaissance and an assessment of the threat level, but to remain vigilant, as the red fog could cause unexpected changes. After some time, the team was fully formed and they set off on their journey. On the way, Jinying explained that the threat levels of animal dens are divided into low, medium, high, and extremely high. Logs come in different types, and the one they're heading towards is a hive type, characterized by a simple structure but complex internal passages, with a swarm of bee-like monsters. Hao asked why they needed 3 whole human vehicles in their squad, and Jinying replied that they would not be facing simple bees, but iron ones. At this moment, Shun, who was driving, distracted them from their conversation by saying that he saw something ahead. Hao looked out the window and saw something big hovering high in the sky. The boy realized that these were the same bees that Jinying had told him about, but he didn't think that they were so big. The girl said that these were reconnaissance-class iron bees, and in no way ordinary bees. Zun sharply turned the steering wheel and told his teammates to hold on. However, the bees had already noticed them and threw their stings towards the car. No matter how hard Zun tried to avoid the stings, he couldn't do it. Jinying shouted that their armored vehicle would not withstand the attack. Hao began to form a shield of beast energy and said that he would take on the swarm from outside. The stings hit the armored car, but thanks to the guy's shield, everyone remained alive. Before the monsters could get close to them, Hao jumped out of the car. He ordered his teammates to seek cover and defend themselves until he returned. Hao used a new hand-strengthening technique and went into battle with the bees. Shun had never seen this ability before, and Jinying said that the boy acquired it after absorbing the beast core during testing. At the time, the girl thought that the guy could only change his body, but as it turned out, he could apply these powers to other objects as well. Jinying was inspired by the fact that Hao could make a weapon out of anything, and now she urgently needed to take notes. Suddenly, something bright green rushed through the swarm towards Hao. His shield ridges were pierced, which instantly caught his attention. The boy realized that this was stronger than the sting of an iron bee. Hao had to find out where exactly the shooting was coming from as quickly as possible, otherwise sooner or later they would all be cornered. The guy told Jinying that there was an unknown source of attacks on the field, so they should immediately find cover and hide. The cars stopped next to a large boulder, and Jinying decided to hide behind it. One of the squad members ran past them with a flamethrower and said that bees were afraid of fire. Jinying tried to stop him, but he didn't listen to her and ran out into the open, for which he immediately paid. A green projectile pierced a fuel tank, causing an explosion. Without being distracted from the battle, Hao asked Jinying what those green spikes were that were being fired at them. The girl checked her tablet and said that they had encountered a queen hound, which was completely inconsistent with the stated level of the lair. Hao shouted for the rest of the squad to take on the worker bees, while the boy was going to fight the queen. Jinying immediately jumped out from behind the boulder and began to concentrate energy around herself. Thanks to her compatibility with the beast core, the girl could control the power of the wind, so now she was summoning a storm. Under its influence, a strong wind arose, which began to push the worker bees back. Thanks to this, Hao was able to breathe for a few moments. The wind carried the bees further and further away. The air currents created a large corridor for passage, free of bees. At the end of this corridor, Hao saw a giant hive, next to which a queen was flying. The guy noticed her immediately, and now knew what he should do next. Hao has already caught his target, and has no intention of letting it go. The giant queen bee was clearly angry. Hao grabbed the metal door from the armored car and twisted it into a long spear. After this, the guy strengthened the metal spear with the help of the animal form. Hao drew his leg back and got into a comfortable position, preparing to attack. The air currents created by Jinying continued to keep the worker bees away. Hao raised his hand and threw the resulting spear with all his might at the queen bee. The spear flew forward, leaving behind a red trail of light. Matka didn't have time to avoid the attack, as the spear moved too fast. It pierced the monster's belly, followed by joyful cries from the team. However, the joy did not last long, because despite the injury, the bee continued to stand in place as if nothing had happened. Jinying said that a hound-level monster couldn't possibly have such strength. The girl began to guess what this was connected with and ran to Hao, telling him not to let the bee go. Jinying was confident that the monster was about to rise to the level of a sovereign. However, it was already too late, and the bee, surrounded by its relatives, rushed towards the hive. Hao collapsed to the ground and said that he would not catch up with her, because he had no strength left for it. Jinying stood over the boy and asked if he was really going to pretend to be a victim, acting like a dead fish. The girl asked if she should give him artificial respiration to revive him. Hao immediately sat down and said that he was not interested in children, which greatly angered Jinying. The girl sat down next to him and handed the guy a chocolate bar to give him a boost of strength, but Hao said that his fatigue was not due to hunger. By this time, Jun had come out of hiding and approached his teammates, asking if everything was okay, while Jinying was sending a report to headquarters. After some time, the field was cleared and the camp was set up, with the team taking turns on duty at the post. They carefully observed changes in the appearance of the hive. Jinying checked the sensor and said that the concentration of red fog in the nest was still within acceptable limits, so they could go inside in protective suits. The girl believed that they shouldn't wait for reinforcements, since the queen was already wounded, and they shouldn't have any problems killing her. Meanwhile, the leadership at Songlian headquarters wanted Hao to become their high-level combat unit. But things weren't that simple. There were also a bunch of mad scientists who insisted on treating the guy as an experimental specimen. Songlian told Yongxing that Hao was too special and needed to be kept under constant supervision. Suddenly, Yunqing's phone rang, indicating an urgent call, causing Songlian to let him go. The captain was informed that the threat level of the nest, where Hao and Jinying had already gone, had begun to sharply increase to high. Songlian said that Jinying was too smart to act rashly, so she had some hidden agenda. The man said that a detachment under the command of Sunju would immediately go to provide support. Wei appeared in the office at that very moment with a report and greatly surprised Yunxin, who thought that the guy was still in the hospital. Songlian asked if Yongxing would mind if he sent him to Wei's side along with Songju, to which the boy replied that he had no objection. The man immediately appointed Wei as Sunju's adjutant and sent him to her headquarters. Yunxing guessed that it was Songlian who had sent his brother to Songju before. Songlian only thought that he didn't understand his daughter's motives in trying to protect Hao, but that was all he could do to help her. The man did not answer Yunxin's question and ordered him to immediately begin carrying out the order. Meanwhile, Hao and Jinying changed into protective suits and entered the hive. The girl reported that her energy levels had hardly changed since their penetration. Jinying said that if the queen bee grew to the level of a sovereign, the difficulty of clearing the nest would increase dramatically. Suddenly, Hao extended his hand and ordered the girl to stop. A moment later, a giant queen pierced the adjacent wall. If Hao hadn't stopped the girl, they might have been hit by her. Jinying said that things were bad for them, because judging by her appearance, the queen bee had actually reached the level of a sovereign. The girl did not understand how this happened, because the concentration of the red mist was too low to support a rapid increase. It soon became clear that not only had the queen become stronger, but the worker bees were also stronger than before. Jinying said that by all indications the level of red fog had long since been critically exceeded. But why then didn't the analyzer sound an alarm? Hao remained calm, but turned around when he heard a cough behind him. Jinying fell to her knees and began to cough. The girl said that someone had damaged their suits, which had sharply reduced their effectiveness. Jinying said that there was definitely a traitor in Flameblood, but they had no time for that now. Hao grabbed the girl by the hand and dragged her towards the exit, avoiding collision with the monster's stings. The guy was even glad that he had encountered such a concentration of red mist. But first, he had to take care of Jinying's safety. Running up to one of the walls, Hao destroyed it with a kick. The guy left the girl in the corner and said that she could stay there for a while thanks to the ventilation. Hao asked the girl to contact headquarters and asked them to prepare new protective suits, and he, in turn, would hold off the monsters. Jinying said she would urgently update the nest information and send it to headquarters. The guy was about to leave, but the girl called out to him. Jinying promised that if the guy died, she would not leave him alone even in hell. Hao chuckled and said that the girl shouldn't worry, because he would definitely return. After this, the boy came out of hiding, appearing before the queen bee and her workers. Hao believed that he had already gained enough power to protect those who were important to him. That is why he again makes the promise he once made to Xiao. The guy concentrated a sphere of red mist and said that he would never be defeated. Now Hao must face off against a master-level monster and his bee helpers alone. The monsters began to surround the guy. Hao understood that the dominant beetle's red energy would only be enough for one shot. The guy swung, thinking only that he could not fail under any circumstances. The red mist began to concentrate in his palm, making the charge more intense. Hao had to defeat the overlord with one blow. He didn't have enough strength for more. The boy threw the sphere at the monster, concentrating all the scarlet energy he could muster into it. In an instant, the entire space of the hive was filled with a red flash. The blow was so strong that it broke through the wall of the monster's lair. For a few moments, Hao stood frozen in place, trying to figure out if he had succeeded. However, soon the guy began to notice that a red fog had begun to spread across the ground. When the dust from the collapses settled a little, Hao saw many red eyes looking at him through the curtain of smoke and scarlet mist. This attack did not help him deal with the enemy, and now the guy froze in place. He couldn't believe that the monsters could survive his blow. 3 minutes earlier, Jinying had managed to repair the red mist analyzer that had been damaged earlier. The device beeped, indicating that it was ready to work. However, as soon as the device measured the concentration of red fog, it turned out that its level had already been exceeded by 2 times. A strong wind blew through the crack Hao had made in the wall of the hive, causing a loud bang to be heard. The girl crept closer to the crack, realizing that an explosion had just occurred outside. Jinying looked closely and realized that the explosion had made the red fog even thicker. Peeking out from her hiding place, the girl realized that due to the concentration of fog, even the lowest bees, scouts, were able to evolve into hounds. Now Hao was in big trouble, because with his attempt he gave the monsters the opportunity to evolve faster. Bees began to surround the guy from all sides. Hao understood that the more they fought, the more monsters there were. Even despite the high concentration of red fog, the guy does not have time to replenish his energy due to the attacks of monsters. Having strengthened his arm, Hao used it to protect himself from the blows of the poisonous stings. But at this rate, he would quickly become exhausted. Jinying understood that in this situation she could not help him in any way, so she just stood aside so as not to create more problems. At some point, the girl noticed symptoms of red mist infection on Hao's neck, indicating that the guy's protective suit had been tampered with. Jinying looked at the device again, and it showed the critical value of the red mist concentration. The girl shouted that at this rate Hao was about to lose control. Jinying concentrated the wind energy in her hand, intending to disperse the red fog around the boy. The girl gathered energy into a sphere and threw it towards Hao. The sphere flew in a circular trajectory towards the guy, dispersing the red fog in its path. The girl put her hand forward with her finger raised and waited for the right moment. As soon as the sphere was near Hao, Jinying lowered her finger, creating an air blast. The sphere began to expand, dispersing the red fog as far away from the guy as possible. Seeing this, Hao froze in place, trying to understand who did this and why. It didn't seem to be much help in his understanding, now that his energy source in the form of the red mist was cut off. The monsters immediately realized that their enemy was at a disadvantage. A few moments later, several hounds shot their stingers at Hao. At the last moment, the guy was able to shield himself with his reinforced hands. The stingers pierced his hands, and soon Hao realized that the poison on the stingers was paralyzing. At that moment, several more poisonous stings were launched at the guy from the other side. Hao was exhausted and poisoned, so he knew he wouldn't have time to dodge this attack. At that moment there was a roar, and the hive was filled with daylight. Wei arrived to help as soon as he received the order, and with one blow he made a hole in the monster's lair. The man flew up to Hao and blocked him with his body, receiving a blow from the stingers in his back. Hao was scared and asked if Wei was okay. The man was a C rank, and his basic ability was body enhancement, in addition to which came the core of a dominant armadillo. Wei ordered Hao not to relax, as their fight was not over yet. The bees began to gradually approach them, surrounding them. However, the next moment they began to be fired at by familiar purple charges. Following Wei was Sunju, who possessed the ability of electromagnetism and could control lightning streams using the core of the monstrous eel. Hao turned to the girl and asked what she was doing here. Sunju replied that her team had received orders from headquarters and had come to help. The girl was no longer going to waste time on talking and ordered her people to destroy all the monsters. At that moment, members of her squad rushed to attack. They were all fully equipped, and judging by their good health, their suits were not damaged. Equipped with gas canisters and flamethrowers, the fighters were going to deal with the hive. Group A was ordered to hold the enemy in front and prevent them from passing along the main route, while Group B would provide covering fire in the middle range. Adjutant Wei was ordered to retreat to the rear with Hao to rest. However, the Lord clearly had no intention of letting his target go so easily. From its sting, the monster fired a red charge that broke through all the lines of defense of Sunju's group. He rushed towards the retreating Wei and Hao. Sunju took aim and ordered the boys not to stop and to run on, while she herself decided to use one technique on the Overlord. Taking aim, the girl concentrated all the electricity in the gun and fired. The electromagnetic bullet flew out of the barrel and was accompanied by bright discharges. The high-voltage discharge field created by this technique destroys and paralyzes everything within its radius. At this moment he rushed towards the Lord. The charge hit the monster, causing multiple bolts of lightning to surround the Overlord. Sunju's team immediately noticed this, and everyone guessed that this was the very monster that Jinying had mentioned in her report. The ruler realized that at this moment she should hide and rushed upward. Sunju ordered not to pay too much attention to her, and to prioritize saving the victims. Hao was amazed by the girl's strength, and Wei told him that in the previous battle, Sunju was unable to fully utilize her strength due to her suit not being fully equipped. The captain approached Wei and Hao and asked the latter where Jinying was now. The guy pointed to the side, but at that moment Jinying's cry was heard. The girl came out of hiding and said that Sunju had been very late, so she would have to treat her, thereby paying for the previous rescue. The team began discussing their next steps and paid no attention to Hao. The guy decided to take advantage of this, and headed towards the red fog to replenish his energy reserves. The previous shot of the red mist sphere failed to defeat the Queen Bee, so Hao will have to try again. Filled with the energy of the fog, the boy clenched and unclenched his fist a couple of times, realizing that he had almost replenished his strength. However, he was distracted by the increasing noise from the team. Everyone looked up in shock, not understanding what was happening. The Queen Bee rose to the ceiling of the hive and began to absorb the red mist. Soon, Jinying realized that the sovereign had absorbed all the fog from the nest. Judging by the energy the monster had absorbed, the queen was about to evolve again. But this was surprising since she had only recently reached the level of a master. The sensor reported a critical concentration of red mist, and Jinying assumed they had encountered a higher-level nest. The queen bee began to rumble loudly, calling her helpers. At that very moment, the hive began to fill with the buzzing of bees. Adjutant Wei saw the enemy approaching from the rear and informed Captain Sunju about it. Without waiting for the girl's decision, Hao rushed to the queen bee and said that he would take care of her, and the hound bees would be with Sunju's squad. Jinying and Sunju cried out in alarm, but the captain quickly came to her senses. She ordered her men to attack the swarm and cover Hao with all their might. The guy rushed towards the queen bee, planning to kill her as quickly as possible, otherwise they would all die here. Thanks to being able to replenish his supply of red mist, Hao was able to move much faster than before. Finding himself next to the Lord in an instant, the guy began to strike one blow after another. The guy strengthened his arms and they took on a beast-like form, but it was not effective. Hao knew that this wouldn't be enough, so he began to form a sphere of red mist. This time the sphere was much larger and was heading straight for the monster. The force of the blow sent Hao himself flying backwards. A few moments later, a loud explosion was heard, indicating that the charge had reached its target. Hao landed and began to observe what was happening. The guy hoped that this time everything would work out for him. However, a black and red stinger burst out of the dust cloud and rushed towards him. Hao jumped to the side and realized that the energy strike had not dealt a fatal blow to the Overlord. The boy realized that he would need some kind of weapon, and then his eye caught the sting of a queen bee, which had just a few moments ago pierced the ground next to him. Hao grabbed the stinger and used beast transformation on it, wrapping it with his energy. The queen bee continued to attack the guy with her projectiles. However, Hao easily dodged them and used them as steps from which he pushed off, getting closer and closer to the monster. The boy tried to wrap all that was left of his red mist energy around the sting to make it more powerful. Hao thought about giving the Overlord a worthy gift in exchange for the monster giving him a weapon. The boy gathered all his strength into this blow and squeezed the sting with both hands, which transformed into a two-handed sword. With one blow, Hao was able to cut the queen bee in half. Due to the energy accumulated in the body of the queen bee, an explosion occurred. Hao landed next to the monster's severed body and held on with his sword with the last of his strength. The only thing left of the Overlord that survived was the core, which glowed with a bright red light. Hao looked at the core and realized that it definitely belonged to an Overlord-level monster. The guy grabbed it and said he would take it for himself. The next moment, the energy from the core began to be absorbed into its own crystal and overflow it. A strong pain pierced Hao's body, and the boy thought that he could not bear it. Meanwhile, Sunju's team successfully dealt with the swarm. Jinying noted that all the monsters seemed to have suddenly weakened, but Sunju ignored it and told them to immediately go help Hao. However, turning towards the guy, the girl froze in shock. Hao lay on the ground and did not move, as if he was dead. Sunju cried out in concern, hoping that the guy was still alive. Jinying immediately ran to Hao and attached sensors to him, trying to figure out what had happened to him. The girl said that the guy's heartbeat was too fast, and his neural signals were disrupted. Jinying said that Hao had been exposed to a thick red fog and would likely lose his mind. Sunju ordered Wei to immediately use the forward medical station and interrupt the nerve signals. After some time, the team arrived at a temporary camp where Hao was able to receive medical assistance. Adjutant Wei placed Hao in the medical capsule. Sunju ordered Jinying to adjust the parameters and monitoring in the medical bay. The girl connected the computer to the capsule, and after a few moments it closed, indicating that the internal anesthesia program had started. Sunju was worried, but she understood that this would not be enough to help the boy. Jinying said that this was only a temporary measure, and that they urgently needed to return to headquarters for treatment. Meanwhile, Hao will meet his beast essence in his mind, which demanded that he give his body under its control. The guy replayed the moment of death of his loved ones in his head. Hao wondered if he would really die here and now. He remembered his sister's face distorted with fear. Hao remembered how signs of red mist poisoning appeared on her face. He had promised her that he would come back, but now all these promises were so far away that he no longer thought he could keep them. Hao gave in and didn't resist the beast essence that held him tightly, pressing him to the floor. At some point, the boy saw his parents standing nearby and asking him to take care of his sister. But they were behind the monster, who had firmly clung to Chao. On the other hand, the boy's sister approached him and reminded him that he had promised to return safe and sound. Hao opened his eyes and looked at his sister. The more time passed, the more people who had recently become close to the guy appeared in the space and asked him to hold on. Hao began to slowly come to his senses, and the desire to fight rose within him. The guy looked confidently into the face of his beast nature and said that everyone was waiting for him, so this was not the end yet. Hao had a duty to find Xiao and protect all his loved ones, so he couldn't fall here. Pointing his finger at the chained beast, the boy said that it was not only his responsibility. Hao firmly chained the beast essence and took control of it again. The guy understood that it was time for him to go back, because everyone was waiting for him. Hao understood that this pain was the price for strengthening, and each breakthrough was like a dance on the edge of an abyss, and the crystal on his chest took the shape of a star. The guy was about to wake up, but soon realized that he couldn't do so, as something was preventing his body from moving. Meanwhile, Hao's body was in the medical capsule, and Sunju's team was currently transporting it to headquarters. However, on the way they were caught in a strong sandstorm, which is why the driver said that they needed to stop somewhere, since further travel was dangerous. Wei told Sunju that there were old city ruins 3 kilometers away where they could hide. Sunju didn't respond to this and only asked Jinying how Hao was doing. The girl looked at the computer and reported that vital signs had temporarily stabilized, but consciousness had not yet returned. Sunju made a decision and ordered Wei to inform the other cars that they were entering the ruins of the city. After some time, dilapidated, abandoned houses appeared ahead. A line of cars headed towards one of the buildings to wait out the sandstorm. Upon entering the building with the large dome, everyone was ordered to get out of their cars. Sunju sensed danger and ordered Jinying to scan the structure and surrounding area for concentrations of red mist and heat signals. The captain ordered the rest of the squad to protect the medical capsule, making this the headquarters' initial task. As Sunju had expected, things were not so simple and they fell into an ambush. The ill-wishers hid on the second open floor and began to shoot poisonous arrows at the squad. Wei immediately used his tempering ability and ordered the squad members to find shelter. When one of the arrows hit the car, Jinying realized that the arrows were poisoned and warned the others about it. As if from nowhere, a huge boulder appeared and was heading from above towards the cars. Sunju ordered everyone to retreat immediately. At the last moment, the girl managed to jump to the side, and using her electromagnetic force, pushed the capsule away from the impact. The cobblestone fell on the cars and broke into many small pieces. Wei used his strengthened body to shield Jinying from arrows and shrapnel. The enemy began to descend to the first floor and surround Sunja's detachment. They were clearly prepared for this meeting, as if they were waiting in ambush for random travelers caught in bad weather. A few moments later, the enemy began throwing bottles at the squad. At first, Sunju did not understand why the enemy himself began to retreat to the side. The bottles broke, and the liquid inside them began to spread a thick green gas. Sunju immediately covered her mouth with her hand and said that this gas imposes a petrifying effect. As soon as the majority of the detachment was paralyzed, the enemy began to act. The entire attacking team rushed towards Sunju's detachment. One of them, a man with a bandaged eye and a huge axe, rushed at Sunja, saying that she was pretty. The man thought that the girl was paralyzed by gas and could not do anything. However, Sunju quickly kicked him in the stomach, activating her electromagnetism ability. The force of the blow sent the man flying to the side and smashing his body through the wall. Sunju headed towards the medical capsule and saw that the enemy had attached a cable to it. The girl wanted to protect the capsule, but her body began to go numb from the gas, and she fell to the ground. The attackers were delighted that they had managed to snag the capsule. They saw the reaction of Sunju's squad to this and assumed that there was definitely treasure in the iron box. Jinying rushed forward, worried that the robbers might damage the capsule. However, the girl was quickly stopped by an arrow being fired into her leg. Jinying fell to her knees and could only watch as the capsule containing Hao's body was carried away by the robbers. However, they had no idea who they would encounter. As soon as the gas's effects wore off, Sunju rushed to help Jinying, who was currently only worried about the kidnapped Hao. The captain broke the arrow and pulled it out of the girl's leg, and told her not to move anymore. Jinying said that the bandits had prepared an ambush for their arrival, and that this was very strange. We reported that all the bandits had fled, and Sunju said that due to the sandstorm, they were most likely moving underground. The adjutant reported that they had found an abandoned elevator, which, according to preliminary checks, should lead them to the enemy's shelter. Sunju split the group, leaving a few warriors to defend Jinying and ordering the rest to go with her. Their first priority is to save Hao, and they must not fail under any circumstances. Jun approached Sunju and said that he also wanted to go with them. But the girl referred to the fact that he was not part of the fighting team, so he should remain in the defense group. The guy insisted that he couldn't just abandon his friend when he was in danger. Jun was persistent, so Sunju gave in and allowed him to follow the capture team. Meanwhile, in the underground lair, the robbers examined the iron box and wondered what might be inside. One of the bandit leaders, a tall man with the nickname Burglar, ordered everyone to step aside. The bandit raised a large axe over the box, intending to cut the box in half. However, this was not successful, as the capsule was reinforced. The burglar was clearly angry, as he had never encountered such a strong box before. The man placed his foot on the capsule and tapped it several times with his axe. A young guy with dirty blonde hair came out of the crowd and said that he could open the box. But at the bottom, the burglar said that 3 of their men went down last time and never returned. The robbers laughed at the guy and said that not even a mouse could survive down there. The blonde insisted that there was a key downstairs that would help them open the box and offered to make a bet. The burglar picked the guy up by the collar and asked who he thought he was, and the blonde said that they would always have time to kill him if he lied. Meanwhile, Hao came to his senses and realized that he was now in the enemy's lair, since after improving the core, his perception had increased significantly. The bandits lifted the capsule and carried it towards the descent. The burglar walked next to the blonde man so that if he attempted to escape, he could kill him on the spot. Soon a huge hole in the floor opened up in front of them, leading into darkness. Hao felt very clearly the state of his own body and the space around him. Just like last time, the boy inherited some abilities from the defeated overlord, such as the poison gland. Soon the robbers descended with the capsule deep underground, where the skeleton of a huge monster was located. The blonde walked closer to the monster's skeleton, and pointing to its rib, said that this was the key. The burglar immediately ordered the iron box to be brought closer. However, as soon as the robbers approached the box, its lid flew off to the side with a crash. Holding a piece of the monster's skeleton in his hands, the burglar turned around in surprise. The robbers moved closer to their leader and said that the box opened by itself. A few moments later, Hao rose from the capsule and pointed his hand towards the enemy, activating the poison gland ability. The poison immediately entered the robbers' bodies, paralyzing them. The effect was immediate, and Hao noted that it was a very useful spatial control ability. The robbers fell to the ground and lost consciousness. The burglar looked at the guy in shock, and different thoughts began to come into his head. He accused Hao of having been his team's mastermind to send a man inside their lair. The guy woke up after the capsule had already ended up in the hands of the bandits, so he didn't understand at all what they were talking about. The burglar hit his chest and said that he used to be a D-level warrior, so he could easily deal with Hao. The man attacked Hao, but he did not move. The guy waited for the enemy to close the distance and activated the poison gland in advance. In an instant, Hao struck burglar in the face, asking if this was truly all he could do. The bandit flew into the wall, punching a hole in it. Hao drew a sharp, startled gasp from the side. Turning his head, he saw the blonde man and asked if he wanted to try fighting him too. The guy didn't answer and just shook with fear. Just a couple of moments later, the blonde lost consciousness, which greatly surprised Hao. Now the guy could calmly examine the place he found himself in. There were many bones of unknown animals around him, and judging by the damage, all the creatures did not die a natural death. Hao assumed he had entered the beast arena. The guy looked at the hole in the ceiling and caught the electromagnetic sounds of Sunju, which penetrated even to a depth of 10 floors. Hao broke the bone he had taken from the burglar and said with a smile that the girl was very hot-tempered. At this moment, Sunju's detachment penetrated the enemy's lair above. Adjutant Wei activated the tempering ability and broke through the ranks of the bandits. With one blow, he incapacitated the robber who stood closest. The area was soon cleared, but the capsule containing Hao was never found. Adjutant Wei approached Sunju and noted that there were claw marks from animals everywhere, so this was not an ordinary robber's den. Jun approached the hole in the floor and said that the detector Jinying had given him had detected activity underground, but the signal quickly disappeared. Sunju said that this could indicate damage to the medical capsule, so it was worth hurrying. At that moment, Hao jumped out of the pit, holding the blonde tightly with one hand, and said that he was glad that everyone was safe. Everyone was very surprised, and Sunju asked the guy what happened downstairs. Hao guessed that there was an abandoned beast arena down below, and Wei immediately asked the captain if they should check it out. Sunju said that they would conduct an inspection later, but now they had to retreat. Jun asked about the boy Hao was holding, but before he could get an answer, the blonde woke up and broke free. The boy grabbed a dagger and was about to stab Hao to kill him. However, the weapon collided with the strong armor that appeared on the guy's body in an instant. The dagger broke into pieces when it hit the animal's scales. Hao snatched the remains of the dagger and asked if the boy really wanted to die that way. The blonde fell to his knees and said that all soldiers were terrible people. The boy raised his head and asked to kill him, but symptoms of red mist poisoning were visible on his face. Hao quickly hit the blonde on the back of the head, knocking him unconscious. The boy fell to the floor and a card flew out of his pocket, which caught Sun's attention. The soldier picked it up and said that it was the testimony of his comrade in arms from the 7th Detachment. Sunju looked at the photo and saw a resemblance between the man in the photo and the guy in front of them, and suggested that they might be brothers. The captain ordered the boy to be taken with her to provide him with medical assistance. Hao realized that the infection was still in its early stages, and suggested that he could save the boy if he absorbed the energy of the red mist. After some time, Sunju's squad arrived at the combat zone of the Hucheng Special Operations Team. As soon as they entered the territory, the guard ordered that Jin be informed of their return. Sunju turned to Adjutant Wei and ordered him to escort Jinying to the medical station. The man had been helping the girl move all this time and now went to carry out the order. However, security blocked their way and informed them that, according to the latest regulations, all those arriving from the high-risk zone of contact with the red fog must undergo immediate examination. Hao asked why this hadn't happened before, and was told that it was an order from above, so they were required to take off their clothes and undergo a full disinfection. Sunju heard this, and turning to the guard, asked who gave this order. The girl said that she was the commander of these soldiers, so she would make the decision about checking them. At that moment, Jin approached them from the side and asked who was refusing to undergo testing. However, seeing Captain Sunju next to Hao, the guy became embarrassed. It was difficult to expect her appearance. The girl asked by what right Jin insisted on an inspection, but her question was ignored. The guy said that he was responsible for epidemiological control, so he insisted on conducting a test on fighter Hao. Sunju was very angry at this behavior and asked who Jin thought he was. The girl walked past the guy and brought Hao and Shun, who was carrying the young guy on his back, with her. Jin tried to stop them, saying that strangers were not allowed into the camp, but Shun said that it was the younger brother of his comrade in arms. Jin chuckled and said that the trash should be thrown in the trash, which made Zun very angry. The guard pointed a gun at the guy, and Jin asked if the guy would really dare to disobey the order. Sunju wanted to intervene again, but Hao stopped her. The guy walked closer to Jin and activated the poisonous vine ability. Hao placed his poison-filled hand on Jin's shoulder, drawing his attention to himself. Within a few moments, the boy felt pain piercing his entire body, and traces of poisoning appeared on his face. Hao said that Jin's methods were very low, and he should stop before it was too late. Hao pretended he didn't do anything and said the boy was so scared of him that he fell. Jin bent over the ground and tried to catch his breath. Hao turned to the guards and said that their commander was tired, so they should escort him to the rest area. Zun, Sunju, and Hao left the choking Jin in the care of his henchmen and left. The girl asked the guy what he had done, and he replied that it was nothing serious. After some time, the medical laboratory tried to figure out the problems associated with the reconnaissance group's suits. Hao assumed that he was the main target of the attackers, and that Jinying was injured by accident, being nearby. Songlian listened to him carefully and ordered that Jinying and Hao be temporarily suspended from external missions. Ancheng said that there was a rat in their headquarters, and they had to find reliable people to protect his daughter and Hao. The scientist also warned that they could not withstand another information leak, and Songlian replied that he understood this. The man turned to Sunja and said that her first priority was to ensure the safety of the boy and girl. Several days passed while the circumstances were being clarified. Having no way to occupy himself with anything, Hao often went outside to get some fresh air. The guy kept going over and over in his head all the fragments of what had happened, trying to arrange them into a logical chain. At this moment he was distracted by Shun, who called him loudly. The guy ran up and reported that during the check of the fair-haired robber, a photograph was found in which there was a girl who looked very much like Hao's sister. Hao immediately grabbed Jun's hand with such force that the boy began to worry about its safety. The guys immediately headed to the medical center to the blonde man's room. The doctor reported that the boy's condition had stabilized, but he still needed to be monitored. The man did not understand why the infection suddenly eased, although the infection was very serious when he was admitted to the hospital. Hao approached the boy and asked the doctor to step aside so that he could examine the patient's blood himself. The doctor decided to leave the room and asked not to harm the patient, as he was just beginning to recover. Hao thought that it was not in vain that he removed the red mist from the blonde before entering the medical center. The guy looked at the photograph that was found on the patient and saw that in it his sister was bandaging the blonde man's leg. At that moment, the bandit woke up and started shouting at Hao. The guy ignored this, and pointing to his sister in the photo, asked if the blonde had seen this girl. The patient said he saw the girl 6 months ago when he went to a refugee camp. Hao asked where the girl was at the moment, but received a negative answer. Suddenly, the blonde man started screaming again, saying that he hadn't seen anyone and didn't know anyone. The guy shouted that he hadn't seen anyone, and hadn't even seen his brother, who had told him to wait in the city. Hao immediately remembered how he himself had promised his sister to return. A shiver ran through Hao's body as he realized that he was no better than this guy's brother. Shun said that the boy's older brother was named Ashu, and he was sent to transport refugees. But along the way they were given another mission, from which the entire team never returned. Hao said that they needed to sort this matter out, after which he began to draw the remaining red mist energy from the blonde. Jun looked at his friend with confusion, but he put his finger to his lips, asking him to keep it a secret. Hao promised the blonde to help him find his brother if he told him all the information about himself and the girl in the photo. The bandit calmed down and asked if the guy would really help him. Hao did not let go of the photo and said that he promised to keep his word. The blonde asked what the guy did to him, but he answered vaguely. The bandit gave in and began to talk about what happened to him 6 months ago and how he met the girl from the photograph. Some time later, the boys went down to the camp canteen to get some food, and Jun asked if Hao would return to them. The boy replied that he would return as soon as he found his missing sister, but now he could not wait any longer. Jun asked what they would do about Sunju, who had ordered Hao to be watched because of traitors in the army. Hao said that he would do everything to find Xiao, and no one could stop him. At that moment, Sunju came up to him from behind and said that she had no intention of interfering with him. Jinying, who had already recovered, was with her and said that the high-quality blood treatment at their camp was impressive. Sunju suggested moving to another place to talk. After a while, all four left the dining room and headed to the meeting room. They sat down on either side of the square table, and Hao asked how Sunju knew about his plans. Jinying quickly opened her tablet and showed the guy the CCTV footage from the bandit's hospital room. Jun was shocked that the girl had been undergoing treatment all this time, but had been following their every step. Jinying said they were simply worried that the camp's internal problems had not yet been resolved. Sunju said that it was she who asked the girl to watch the video from the cameras after the doctor came to her and reported on the guy's visit to the patient. The captain promised that she was not going to interfere with the guy and even wanted to help him find his sister. Hao looked like he was about to refuse help, but he didn't have time to say anything. Jinying sat closer to the guy and said that she was also ready to help in any way she could. Jun jumped up from his seat and said that he would also always support Hao. Sunju stopped them and asked what Hao planned to do next. The guy stopped resisting and accepted his friend's help with a smile on his face. Meanwhile, we are transported to the destroyed suburb of Chishi. Jiangxi came to the group's camp and said the password to be allowed to see the boss. The man said that he urgently needed to contact a certain Hong. The boss said that he didn't have time for Jiangxi now, but the man began to insist, saying that this was information about Hao. The boss changed his plans and called Hong to tell him the news. Jiangxi was sure that this time Hao would meet his end. A few days later, the checkpoint in the suburb of Chishi tightened the rules for entering the territory. The soldiers demanded that everyone who wanted to pass through undergo an inspection and report the place from which they had arrived. Sunju, Shun and Hao were stuck in a traffic jam, and the girl said that this control only caused chaos. Hao expressed surprise at the captain's personal car, and she said that they couldn't use military vehicles during off-duty hours, so they had to take their own. Jun asked if it was safe to leave Jinying alone at headquarters, but Sunju said that she had left Adjutant Wei with her to look after her. Hao said that the girl would be much more useful if she were at headquarters, and she could contact them using military communications. At that moment, a soldier knocked on the car window and said that they needed to go through security to proceed further. One of the soldiers at the post shouted that there was an attack by an anomalous creature a kilometer away from them. Sunju heard this and looked out the window to assess the situation. A pack of iron wolves was indeed heading in their direction. The monsters were surrounded by a red fog, which was getting closer and closer to the post. The soldiers abandoned their posts and ran for cover, not intending to protect civilians. Sunju was very angry about the behavior of the officials who abandoned people to their fate outside the city walls. Hao calmly got out of the car and said that he would handle everything himself. People ran out of their cars and tried to run to the post, but the monsters followed them. One man had already lost hope of being saved, because the wolf was very close. At that moment, Hao appeared and decapitated the monster with one blow. The man froze in place, but Hao told him that if he wanted to live, he had to run. The iron wolves began to surround the boy who stood alone against them. These monsters were not special and had the lowest level. The leader of the pack jumped forward, preparing to attack Hao first. The guy stood in place, and this picture seemed very familiar to him. He remembered the day his parents died. That day, the same wolves appeared and attacked the traffic jam in which he was standing with his family. Hao barely managed to save his sister, but he was still unable to help his parents. Back then, the wolves were much stronger than him, so he couldn't do anything about it. Now Hao transformed his hands into a beast form and said that he would not allow the events of the past to repeat themselves. In an instant, the guy dealt with the entire flock without anyone's help. Seeing this, the guards became frightened and gathered to inform the chief about Hao's arrival. The boy put away his animal form and walked up to Sunju's car, listening to praise from Shun. Sunju said that she would handle the rest herself, after which she turned to the soldiers at the security post. The girl showed her ID and ordered the post to immediately stop checking and let all civilians in. Once the road was open, the team got into the car, and Sunju said that the reason for the recent safety checks was clearly not routine. Hao thought about her words and guessed that the management was looking for someone. However, the guy decided to put this matter off until later, because right now their first priority was Ashu's case. Soon the team arrived at the headquarters of the Chishi City Defense Detachment. They went into the archives, and Jun showed Hao where all the patrol team's files were kept. Hao looked through all the files carefully and said that Ashu's file was not there either. At this time, Sunju was searching the computer, trying to find any notes on this case. After scrolling through a few more files, Jun realized that the archive contained no mention of not only Asha, but also of the entire Division 7. After finishing searching the computer, Sunju said that the local database had been destroyed, and there was no record of Ashu in it. The room was silent for a moment, after which Shun said that it was all in vain. Hao asked if there was any other way to get the information. Sunju contacted Jinying and asked her to check the information through her connections. After receiving the answer, the captain told Hao that Jinying would be able to find the data, but it would take time. The guys weren't very surprised, since everyone had long called the girl all-hearing and all-knowing. Suddenly, Jun remembered that Captain Jia was a veteran of the former government army, which meant that he had been the leader of Ashu in the past and could tell something about him. The team decided to head to Captain Jia's home, but found only traces of a fight that apparently ended recently. Hao looked around the room and said he was 80% sure it was the city defense force that did it. Shun explained to Sunju that he and Hao had previously been under Jia's command and had stood up for him when the man was being bullied by Captain Jiangxi. Hao said that in that case, the main target of all these checks was him, so they should go to headquarters immediately. When the team went outside, soldiers were already waiting for them, looking for Captain Sunja. The deputy head of the Chishi City Defense Detachment, Litsi, came out to them and said that he had received a message about Sunju's arrival in the city. The man said that Patrol Captain Jia, who was under his command, had gone missing while on a mission outside the city, and they needed help finding him. Sunju asked why she should help them, to which Liki replied that due to the increased activity of the Red Fog, Chishi's administration was unable to keep up with everything. Hao walked behind the girl and wanted to tell her something, but she interrupted him and said that she knew everything herself. Sunju agreed to help with the search, but only if Litsi would act with them. The man replied that this would only hinder them, since a team cannot have two leaders. Sunju said that this was not a request, but an order, and if Litsi refused, it would be regarded as treason. Once they were all in the car, Hao asked Liki why they sent Captain Jia on such a risky mission, knowing full well about the increased activity of the Red Fog. The guy assumed that it was done intentionally, but the deputy began to justify himself, saying that Captain Jia himself insisted on the task. Litsi led them to the right place, after which everyone got out of the car. Hao immediately sensed something was wrong, as there was no smell of red fog in the area, which completely contradicted the deputy's words. Zun noticed Lichi step aside and write something furiously on his phone. The guy approached the man and asked what he was doing. Realizing he had been spotted, the deputy said he had already brought them to the location and asked the soldiers to take him away. Litsi asked to tell Sunja that now the search is her concern and he is leaving. However, the girl quickly blocked his way and said that he couldn't just leave. Sunju demanded to know why Litsi had lured them to this area. At that moment, the weather suddenly deteriorated and lightning bolts struck the ground. Litsi fell to the ground in fear and said that he was already coming. The lightning became more and more frequent, and one of them was so large that it shattered the asphalt next to the team into pieces. Litsi bowed to the ground and screamed that he did not want to die like this. Hao looked ahead and said that he now understood why there were no lower-level anomalies around. One glance from Sunju was enough to understand what they were up against. In front of them was a huge monster, the Thunder Beast. The monster's body was covered with black scales and purple crystals. Shun was frightened and asked where the Overlord-level monster had suddenly appeared from. Now all attention was focused on the Thunder Beast, and the crawling Litsi no longer interested them. Hao said that this was unusual monster activity, which meant that the disappearance of the patrol squad could not be a simple coincidence. Litsi rose to his feet and ran away with a loud cry. Sunju turned sharply and ordered to grab him. Jun understood that he would not be able to cope with the monster, so he began to catch up with Lichi, who was shouting that he was not going to die like this. The Lord began to accumulate energy, drawing the lightning surrounding him into his mouth. The next moment, he used the electric breathing skill. As soon as Sunju noticed this, she immediately jumped to the side, warning Hao. The guy ducked to the ground, avoiding collision with the flow of energy. The charge hit the neighboring building and destroyed it. Hao dodged the fragments and said that it would be difficult to deal with this monster. Sunju told the guy to hold on as best he could while she went to get the gun from the car. Moving a little further away from the monster, Hao saw a man sitting on the roof of a nearby building. The man was out of the monster's sight, so he felt confident. On the roof was Zhang Shi, who was watching the battle with pleasure and was sure that Hao would not get out of here alive. Next to him stood a subordinate who was surprised that some device could control a Overlord-level monster. Zhang Shi said that the people behind them not only created this device, but also had an entire base for taming monsters. The man personally saw this base, and the monsters contained therein are incomparable to ordinary ones. Zhang Shi watched the battle that had begun with rapture. He hoped that after capturing Hao, the Redstone City would belong entirely to him alone. Returning to the battle, Hao realized that the monster was fighting using an elemental ability. The boy was confident that the poison obtained from the Queen Bee was capable of affecting even Overlord-level creatures. However, as soon as Hao came a little closer to the monster, it raised its head and howled. Streams of energy threw the guy aside. Hao managed to regroup to avoid being harmed, but his beast form disappeared. The boy looked at his hands and realized that his abilities had been forcibly cancelled. Sunju had the same ability, and it was called an electromagnetic neutralizing grenade. Meanwhile, the snake monster raised its paw over Hao, gathering energy in it for a strike. The guy understood that his abilities were temporarily not working, so he had to rely on physical strength. At the last moment, Hao jumped to the side to avoid the collision. The lightning created certain difficulties, forcing the guy to retreat further and further. Hao knew he couldn't lose his concentration, but he was already pretty exhausted. The boy expected that this monster would be different from the usual Overlord-level monsters. While the monster's body was shrouded in lightning, Hao had no chance to get close. Sunju came up from behind and said that they needed to destroy the lightning armor, and that her core, which she had received from the lightning beast, would help them with this. The girl said that a full-power neutralizing grenade would be able to neutralize the beast's lightning armor. But the effect would not last long. Hao rushed forward, having said beforehand that this would be quite enough for him. The guy said that he would only need a moment, and he would take care of the rest. Seeing the enemy attack, the monster roared, sending lightning bolts flying in all directions. Sunju took aim and fired an electromagnetic neutralizing grenade. The projectile hit its target and the lightning armor fell, giving Hao access to the monster's body. The boy struck with his beastly claws, causing the overlord to howl in pain. Hao's claws were laced with the queen bee's venom, which was supposed to paralyze the beast. Having landed, the guy turned around to assess the result of his and Sunju's efforts. Their plan worked, and the overlord's movements were now very slow. The monster tried to attack Hao, but it was useless, as he was much faster. The guy started to deliver one blow after another at great speed. Although this overlord's attack power is higher than the previous ones, without his lightning power, his body is much weaker. However, Hao knew that without Sunju's help, he wouldn't have been able to cope, so he had to improve himself more. The guy noticed that the monster began to crawl away. Hao asked if he really wanted to run away without leaving anything in return. Jiangshi was no longer so enthusiastic, as the monster was almost defeated. Sunju watched Hao and understood that he had become stronger, which meant that she should not lag behind him. Lost in her thoughts, the girl did not notice that danger was creeping up on her from behind. Jiangshi smiled and told his assistant that he had come for Hao with more than one overlord-level monster. Sunju turned around sharply when she heard a growl behind her. A huge lizard-like monster crept up on her. Hearing the growl, Hao was immediately distracted from the first monster. The boy saw how the second lord opened his mouth to swallow Sanja. Hao quickly jumped up and pushed the girl aside. Sunju fell, dropping the rifle from her hands. When the girl turned around, the overlord had already slammed his jaw shut, grabbing Hao. Sunju screamed in horror, not believing what was happening. However, the monster immediately raised its head up and began to tremble. The lord's mouth began to slowly open. Hao appeared from behind the monster's teeth and asked if the overlord really thought he could be swallowed so easily. The creature decided not to fight the guy and simply spat him out. Hao rose from the ground and said that it was a great honor for them to meet two rulers at once. Sunju ran up to the guy, asking if he was okay. Suddenly the overlord disappeared, and the girl immediately realized that they were facing a monster that was enhancing its camouflage for a surprise attack. Sunju said that without a partner with high sensitivity, this monster would be difficult to deal with. Wary of the invisible monster, the boy and girl completely forgot about the first overlord. Hao and Sunju came to their senses when a lightning bolt flew towards them. Jumping aside, the boy said that the lord had restored his energy too quickly. Suddenly, Hao felt a movement of air next to him. The guy immediately realized that the invisible lord had snuck up on him, but he didn't have time to react. The monster threw Hao aside with one powerful blow of its paw. The next second, the lord's disguise fell away, and he found himself very close to Sunja. Hao lost his concentration due to the pain and flew several meters to the side. Sunju gathered electromagnetic energy in her palm and was about to strike the overlord. An explosive grenade rushed towards the invisible monster. As soon as she touched his body, the lord howled in pain. However, the next moment, he disappeared from sight again. Sunju ran up to Hao and said that the monster had been hit by her electromagnetic grenade, so they could now track it. The guy said that this would be good, since his sensors couldn't do this. Hao asked to tell him the exact location of the beast so that he could deal it one precise, fatal blow. The girl scanned the space and reported that the overlord was attacking from the right rear. Hao immediately activated his beast form and pressed his hand and foot against the monster's upper and lower jaws. The guy pointed a sphere of red mist into the monster's mouth and said to taste it. After launching the sphere, Hao immediately jumped to the side, and the next second, there was an explosion. The monster's head exploded and its body froze for a few moments. As the overlord collapsed to the ground, Hao said it was time to finish off the first monster. The guy asked if Sunju's electromagnetic grenade would work again. The lightning lord roared and numerous bolts of lightning spread out from him in different directions. The girl replied that she didn't have the beast core right now, so she didn't have enough energy for it. After dodging another strike from the lightning beast, Sunju said there was another way to defeat it. The girl placed her hand on Hao's back and created an ionosphere around him that could last for 10 seconds. The guy looked at the field created around himself and said that this would be enough for him. Hao understood that Sunju had completely run out of strength, so she would not be able to help him anymore. So he only had one try. The lord gathered lightning energy into his paw and struck the ground with it. Lightning struck the ground near Hao, shattering the asphalt. The guy deftly dodged, because it was impossible to allow lightning to hit the ionosphere. As he approached, Hao began to accumulate all his power in his right hand. The monster lifted its head up, revealing its chest, unprotected by scales, to its opponent. Hao's right hand took on a beast-like form and hardened into a spear shape. With one powerful blow, the guy pierced the lord's body right through. At the same moment, the ionosphere imposed by Sunj dissipated. Zhengxi was shocked, because even 2 B-level hunters couldn't always handle 2 overlords, let alone a C-level hunter. The man ordered his assistant to launch anti-tank missiles so that Sunju and Hao could not escape from here, and he, in turn, would go after Luton's people. Meanwhile, Hao shed his beast form and walked away from the monster, saying that they were finished. The boy approached the monsters and collected the cores from them, thinking that this time it was worth sharing with Sunju, since she had tried hard. Hao turned to the girl to ask her opinion on the matter. However, his words were cut short when he saw Sunja. Having transferred the remaining energy to Hao, the girl lost consciousness. At that moment, Jun approached them, dragging behind him the tied-up Lychee, who continued to scream that he did not want to die. Hao told his friend that Sunju had passed out from overusing her ability, but she would be fine. At this moment, Zhengxi arrived with reinforcements and anti-tank missiles, ordering them to open fire, ignoring Lychee. As soon as the fire was opened, Lychee lost his temper and shouted that he would not tolerate this any longer. He told everyone that Zhengxi had declared a hunt for Hao and was currently hiding somewhere nearby. The man, meanwhile, was furious because not a single missile had hit its target. The soldiers explained that due to the recent battle with the overlords, the electromagnetic field in the area had been destroyed, making it impossible to aim accurately. The attacks stopped for a while, and Hao ordered Shun to immediately take Songju and Lychee and report to Jinying that Zhengxi had rebelled. The guy asked to make every effort to bring this matter to the attention of Chief of Staff Songlian. When Shun got everyone into the car, he called out to Hao, but the boy said that he couldn't leave because then the car would become the enemy's main target. Hao ordered his friend to leave immediately, and he would take charge of the attacks. Jun was hesitant about leaving the boy, but when he kicked away the missile, all his doubts disappeared. The guy said that he would take Captain Sunju to headquarters and would definitely return for Hao. The car headed towards the headquarters, and Hao took on all the missiles, covering the rear. Zhengxi immediately realized that the guy was moving towards them and ordered to block his path by all means until Luton's men arrived. The subordinates didn't understand who Hao was if the captain was so afraid of him. However, in an instant the guy found himself on the roof and dealt with all the soldiers. Zhengxi was extremely frightened and shocked that Hao remained in action even after fighting 2 overlords. However, the man was unable to run far, because Hao quickly caught up with him and knocked him to the ground. The boy covered his right hand with a beast form and grabbed Zhengxi's face, slamming him to the floor. Hao said he was glad to see the man in good health, but he had gotten involved with the wrong people. However, the next moment a fist hit the guy in the face. Hao was thrown back a few meters, and his beast form dissipated. A B-class warrior from the Luton faction, named Lu Feng, arrived to help Zhengxi. Zhengxi was delighted to see his boss, and thanked him for saving him. Hao asked who he was, but Lu Feng replied that the guy didn't need to know at all. In an instant, the man disappeared from Hao's sight. A second later, he appeared out of nowhere and struck the guy, forcing him to retreat back. They seemed to be fighting on equal terms, meeting each other's blows with counterattacks. However, the battle with the 2 overlords exhausted Hao's strength, and he began to retreat. Lu Feng moved confidently, driving the guy into a corner. Hao didn't expect such pressure, so he completely lost his concentration. At some point, Lu Feng's hands began to glow due to the lightning surrounding them. This time, the man hit Hao in the stomach and said that he was too weak. The guy was thrown into the wall at great speed. Lu Feng didn't look like he was even a little bit exhausted by this reception. He simply watched as Hao hit the wall, causing energy to be released from his body, creating an explosion. Lu Feng looked at the motionless guy and said that he expected to meet serious people, but they turned out to be pathetic. The man said that he was very surprised that the 2 lords lost, and Zhengxi apologized for it. Lu Feng said that he would take care of the rest, so the captain could return to his place. Zhengxi kicked Hao in the face and said he looked like a dead dog. The man called his assistants and ordered them to turn on video communication with Captain Jia. His assistants approached the cage where Jia was locked and told him to look at his phone. Zhengxi pointed the camera at the unconscious Hao and sent him his regards. Captain Jia became angry and asked the man why he was doing all this, to which he replied that he wanted Hao to end up badly. Zhengxi left Hao and ordered the second team to go up to the roof, pick up the boy and take him to the taming base. However, Hao was conscious, listening attentively to the man's words and absorbing the crystal of the invisible overlord. After some time, the boy was taken to the Luton base in the Red Stone City, which was located 300 meters underground. Hao was chained and placed in a capsule with green liquid for control. All this time, the guy was gaining strength and figuring out the new abilities received from the beast core of the Overlord level. Now Hao could use the shadow mask to hide his presence. The guy pressed his hand against the glass, and after a few moments cracks began to appear. The glass burst and green liquid gushed out of the vessel onto the floor. The siren went off, but Hao didn't pay attention to it. He was only thinking about how far this place was from the city. Panic erupted in the observation room after Subject 0907 escaped. The manager ordered that the security service be informed about this. Hao meanwhile pointed his hand at the surveillance camera and interrupted the signal. Security officers were ordered to capture the guy alive. They took with them powerful doses of anesthetic and special nets for catching monsters in order to cause the least possible harm to the test subject. They soon approached the room where the test subject was located, but Hao again used his invisibility ability. The guards froze in place, never having found the subject after the doors opened. The captain ordered his men to search the room, while Hao, like a shadow, crept between them. The guy was more than pleased with his new ability, but he was worried that he could only last 10 minutes in this form. Hao decided that he needed to find Captain Jia as quickly as possible. They managed to find him fairly quickly, and only 2 people were guarding the man. Hao quickly snuck between them to instantly neutralize them before they could make any noise. As soon as the guy dealt with the guards, he became visible again. Hao ran to the cage and bent the bars so that Captain Jia could get out. The man was glad to see the boy and praised him for his good work. While Jia was greedily drinking water, Hao said that he was looking for the man to find out about Ashu's disappearance. But now they themselves were caught up in it. The man said that he himself had been trying to find Asha all this time, but everything turned out not to be so simple. Jia said that some units were created for certain special missions, but all the soldiers suddenly disappeared. And during the investigation, Zhang Shi was the one who interfered with the investigation the most. Hao said that the city defense squad didn't have enough influence, so there was someone bigger behind them, and Zhang Shi would be able to lead them to their goal. At that moment the door opened and several security officers entered the room. Captain Jia stepped forward with the bat and told Hao not to interfere in this matter. However, the guy did not stand behind Jia and attacked first. With one blow he neutralized all his opponents and said that if he escaped now, his entire plan with the imaginary capture would go down the drain. Hao looked at the captain and asked if he was able to move on. The man chuckled and replied that he was the great and unkillable old man Jia, and it was not so easy to disable him. Meanwhile, news of Hao's escape reached Zhang Shi, and he ordered the immediate release of the experimental monsters to contain the boy. However, the laboratory staff refused to obey his orders, since the man did not have such authority. Zhang Shi said that there was no point in waiting for the captain's order, because if Hao broke through to them, they would all die. Meanwhile, Hao and Jia were slowly approaching the control room, but the guy suddenly froze. The laboratory staff nevertheless followed Zhang Shi's words and released the monsters. Hao told Captain Jia to hide somewhere, and he would handle the rest himself. The guy realized that monsters were being bred in this laboratory, which was a crime against humanity. Hao was certain that the overlords he and Sunju had defeated earlier were created in this place. One by one, the guy killed all the monsters using only his beast form. Hao wondered if the lab really thought he could be stopped by these low-level monsters. The lab workers began to get into their cars, and Zhang Shi said that if it weren't for his actions, they wouldn't have had time to destroy their data. The man was confident that the existing number of monsters would be enough to stop Hao. However, at that moment the wall was broken through and one of the boulders hit Zhang Shi in the back. Hao broke through several walls and went straight to the man, not intending to get lost in the labyrinth of the underground laboratory. Zhang Shi was shaking with pain and could not rise from his knees. His gaze was riveted on the cars in which the employees drove away, leaving him to his fate. The lab workers said they no longer needed the man, so he could simply die. After this, they activated explosives, which collapsed the tunnel through which they escaped. Zhang Shi found the strength to rise and ordered Hao not to come closer, threatening to kill Captain Jia. However, these were empty threats, so the guy grabbed the man by the neck and pinned him to the wall, asking who was behind all this. Zhang Shi was surprised that Hao didn't react to the threat directed at the captain. But a moment later Jia entered the room. Zhang Shi gave in and said that a certain Mr. Hong was behind all this, but he had never seen him and did not know his plans. Hao asked why they were following him and for what purpose they destroyed the entire archive, but Zhang Shi admitted that he knew nothing about it. However, the man knows where all the missing members of the patrol squad are sent. Zhang Shi said that Mr. Hong himself should be in that place and promised that he would lead them there if Hao spared his life. After a while, Hao released Zhang Shi and he opened the hatch, saying that there was a secret passage below that the explosion had not collapsed. The man said that they would be able to get to the headquarters through it. As they descended, The men immediately noticed a strange smell, and Zhang Shi began making plans in his head on how to get rid of the enemy. Suddenly Hao froze, feeling a strange pressure. The boy turned around, noticing a faint purple mist that seemed to be following them. Hao was sure that there was someone else in this dungeon besides them. Something was moving beneath the earth. The next day, Sunju and her squad infiltrated the Green Vine and Red Mist storage base. The girl stood in the middle of the room with a broken vessel and assumed that Hao was kept in this place. Jin Ying approached the girl and said that they had not been able to find anything except a pile of monster corpses. Sunju said she was never able to piece together all the evidence into a complete picture. Jin Ying was angry at the captain for managing to lose Hao during the archive investigation, and Shun said that they simply didn't expect such actions from Zhang Shi. Jin Ying had already reported Zhang Shi's betrayal to Captain Songlian, and he was very angry. Wei brought Li Qi and asked what they would do with him next. Sunju said that they should extract from him all the information he knows. Li Qi fell to his knees and said that he really didn't know anything anymore because Zhang Shi hadn't shared anything with him anymore. Jin Ying intervened in the conversation and said that they already knew about the connection with the Green Vine, so the man must tell them everything in order to save his life. Li Qi was afraid for his life and said that Zhang Shi often went to the Red Fog storage system that belonged to the Green Vine group. Jin Ying asked what kind of place this was. The man replied that he didn't know anything for sure, but there was definitely something fishy there. Sunju ordered them to advance, but Wei told her that they should wait for the main forces, which were sent to suppress the rebellion in Qixi. The girl replied that their first priority was to save Hao, so they could split up. Soon, Litzi led Sunja and her team to the Red Fog storage system. However, the security guards stopped the girl and said that even members of the Bloody Special Forces unit were not allowed into this room. Sunju didn't listen to them and incapacitated the security commander with one blow. Rising from the floor with the help of his colleagues, the commander ordered that Lu Feng be informed immediately. Sunju, Jinying, and Wei entered the room, and at that moment the guards informed Lu Feng of the arrival of the Bloody Squad. The man stood on one of the tanks with red fog and said that he could see it anyway. The team that entered the room did not notice the man on the tank, but Sunja told them not to let their guard down. Lu Feng jumped down from the elevated platform, causing a light thud to echo throughout the room. Jinying noticed it, but she couldn't see the source of the sound. At the last moment, the girl managed to jump to the side, and Lu Feng struck right at the place where she was standing. Jinying did a somersault in the air and bounced away from her opponent. Lu Feng noted that the girl had a very quick reaction. Sunju snatched the dagger and asked what it was. The man said he would not answer that question and rushed towards Jinying, passing by Songju. We used a combat seal and covered the girl with his body. However, the force of the blow was so strong that it broke through the defense. In an instant, Wei was thrown to the side. Jinying, who was standing behind him, was hit and ended up between the wall and Wei's body. Sunju quickly approached and raised her dagger to strike. Wei cleared his throat and warned that the enemy was at least B rank. Sunju launched a punch, but Lu Feng dodged it with ease. The man bent down to the ground and turned around. After that, he struck Sunja in the stomach. The girl flew to the side and her breath caught in the pain. Lu Feng was there at that very moment and raised his leg to strike. Sunju had not yet had time to recover, so she flew into the wall from the subsequent blow. Jinying screamed in horror, but she knew there was little she could do to help. Wei said that Sunju was bad at close combat, and without her weapon, she couldn't reach her full potential. Lu Feng lifted Sunju by his hair and said that their strength level was even lower than the guy he encountered yesterday. The girl said that the man was not particularly strong either, so she did not believe that Hao could lose to him. Lu Feng didn't like these words and threw the girl up. The man said that Sunju, in this situation, is still trying to act like a hero. Lu Feng said that today, they would test which of them could withstand his blows, and raised his hand to strike. However, the next moment a fist flew into his face, which broke the mask on his face. Hao managed to appear in the room in time to prevent the attack on Sunja. Lu Feng didn't expect his appearance and flew aside. The force of the impact caused a dent in the wall. Meanwhile, Hao jumped up and grabbed Sunja in his arms. Jinying screamed that the guy was holding the girl like a princess and that she wanted the same. Hao ignored these words and landed, carefully holding Sunja in his arms. The guy asked her if everything was okay, but she didn't answer, not believing that Hao was in front of her now. Sunju looked at the guy for a few seconds, as if enchanted. The girl asked if Hao was really okay. The guy smiled and asked in response if Sunju herself was okay. Their pleasantries were interrupted by Jinying, who asked how long they were going to hug. The girl said that they still had a lot of unresolved matters. Lu Feng finally came to his senses and, clutching his face, asked what was going on. The man asked how Hao ended up here, and he replied that his old friend brought him here. Zhang Shi emerged from a hole in the wall, led at gunpoint by Captain Jia. Lu Feng was furious at the man's betrayal and rushed at him. Hao parried Lu Feng's blow and said that it was not time for Zheng Shi to die yet. The guy said that the man knows many more secrets. Sunju moved closer to Zheng Shi to keep an eye on him. Lu Feng was furious that some sewer rats were bothering him. The man used the sound waves ability and began to strike Hao, but the guy parried all the attacks with one hand. The guy said that Lu Feng was moving too slowly and then kicked him. The man flew to the side again, breaking it once again. However, he quickly came to his senses and began to gather energy to attack Hao. Lu Feng was going to kill the guy here and now, so he launched a sonic wind blade at him. Hao remained calm and leaned back slightly. The blade flew past him and hit the wall. Jinying was angry that Liu Feng had the same ability as her. Sunju asked who Liu Feng really was, and Zhang Shi said that he only knew that the man was Hong's subordinate. Lu Feng went into overdrive and launched several blades at once. However, this time the attack did not reach Hao, because he moved much faster than the blades. The guy rushed towards Lu Feng and said that he was too slow for Class B. The man even thought for a moment that Hao was deliberately trying to irritate him and force him to fight at full power. The guy flew up to him and struck, throwing Lu Feng into one of the tanks. The man tried to come to his senses and kept repeating in his head that it was impossible. He couldn't believe that someone like Hao could defeat him, so he struck the tank, creating a hole in it. The room began to fill with red mist, causing Zhang Shi to panic. Sunju ordered Wei to get everyone out of the room, but the adjutant was worried about his captain. The girl said that she would stay to keep an eye on Hao. Jinying was also worried about Sunju, but a thought came into her head and she hurried to share it with the captain. Meanwhile, Lu Feng took out a small capsule and asked if Hao really thought he could defeat him. The man swallowed the capsule, thinking that even though his health would decrease, he would retain his sanity and be able to absorb the red mist. Lu Feng began to absorb the red mist and ordered Hao to attack. The man rushed towards the boy at great speed. Their collision created an explosion that raised a strong wind in the room. Now Hao didn't have time to dodge, as Lu Feng became much faster. The man struck one blow after another and asked the boy if he felt the speed of Class A. Hao tried to defend himself, but his speed was not enough. Lu Feng was glad that the capsule gave him more strength. Another blow pushed Hao to the opposite end of the room. Lu Feng asked how long they could block his attacks, and perhaps it was time to end it all. At that moment, the man noticed that the wind currents had suddenly changed direction. At the top of one of the cisterns stood Jinying with Hao, and the girl dispersed the air with her power. The wind currents created a barrier around the cistern, preventing Lu Feng and the red mist from getting too close to them. Jinying used the storm defense ability. Hao felt the air around him become denser, increasing his flexibility and speed. Jinying chuckled and said that it was all her doing. Lu Feng didn't intend to wait for them to finish talking, and sent a blast of red energy towards them. It was an ability called Red Mist Cannon. Hao easily stopped the flow and asked if Lu Feng really thought this was an outstanding ability. The man looked at the guy in confusion, and couldn't believe that he had absorbed his attacks. Lu Feng didn't have time to notice how Hao approached him and struck him. Thanks to Jinying's air support, the boy moved faster than Lu Feng again. The man had not yet had time to recover from the first blow when new ones rained down on him. Hao said that the red mist would not help the man, so he would kill him. With another blow, the guy slammed Lu Feng into the floor. Hao stood over the man and asked where Hong was. Lu Feng looked at the guy and now realized that he was faced with a real monster. Everything that was happening was monitored via security cameras from the main headquarters of the Luton Company. Mr. Hong was a middle-aged man with red hair, and he couldn't believe that Lu Feng had been defeated. The man said that Hao was much more interesting than they thought, so they should keep a close eye on him. Hong ordered his subordinates to destroy the remaining information and follow him. The man pressed the sensor and said that he needed to ask the guy downstairs to clean up here. After his actions, the crystal at the base under the city of Chishi was activated. The monster that had been lurking underground all this time awakened and began to act. Meanwhile, we returned to Hao, who was trying to find out the location of Mr. Hong from Lu Feng. However, it was all in vain, as the final attack knocked the man out. Hao said he did nothing fatal. Jinying poked Lu Feng with her stick and said that he was unlikely to answer them now. Hao turned his attention to Zhang Shi, who was involved in the kidnapping of the patrol, and the man promised that he would lead them to the right place. Zhang Shi led them down the stairs to the lower floors of the base. The man's only doubt was that he didn't have the password to the door, but Hao said that they didn't need it. With one kick, the guy knocked down the door into another corridor. Hao asked if all the missing patrolmen were really in that place. Zhang Shi said that he could not answer this question exactly, but he could take him to the place. At some point, Hao stopped and turned his head to the side. Sunju tensed up and asked what happened. Hao stopped next to a large door and said that he could feel human breath behind it. However, the guy can't just knock down the door because he's afraid of hurting people. But Jinying said she would take this matter upon herself. Hao watched as the girl opened the laptop and connected to the cable. Jinying said that she was a professional in her field, which meant they could rely on her. For a while the whole group was silent, and the silence was broken only by the clicking of the keyboard. A final loud click was followed by Jinying's words that she was finished. The next moment, the door automatically opened in front of the group. A view of a huge laboratory filled with capsules opened up before them. These capsules contained human bodies floating in liquid, connected to sensors. Jinying barely held back a scream, and Wei was shocked by how many people had been kidnapped for this experiment. Sunju angrily grabbed Zhang Shi by the collar and asked what they were doing here. But the man said that he only sent people here and didn't know anything else. In one of the capsules, Captain Jia saw Ashu, whom they had been looking for so long. Hao stepped closer and gathered energy in his fist, preparing to break the capsule. Jinying stopped him abruptly and said that this life support device and its actions could harm Ash. At that moment, Sunj received a message that reinforcements had arrived, and the girl explained how they could proceed further. Adjutant Wei called the girl and said that he had found a flashing crystal. When they first entered the room, the crystal was not glowing, so the sudden change attracted everyone's attention. Zhang Shi quickly realized what this thing was and jumped aside. Jinying looked at the crystal through the flask and saw that these vibrations were very strange and looked like the release of energy. The next moment, the ground beneath my feet began to shake, as if an earthquake had begun. Hao ordered Jinying to step aside immediately, because he thought that all this was happening because of the crystal. The girl seemed to be hypnotized, but a sudden movement caused her to be distracted. At the last moment, Jinying jumped to the side. Lu Feng burst into the room, mutated into a monster by the red fog. Taking a closer look, Sunju noticed that the monster's appearance was very similar to her uncle. Hao grabbed the flask with the crystal and said that this device is bait for monsters, and the ground is shaking because something more dangerous is approaching. The boy ran from the laboratory, hoping to take the danger away from the people so that they would not suffer from the destruction. After some time, Hao and Sunju, who followed him, reached the roof of the building, and the mutated Lu Feng pursued them. Hao noticed the monster and said that they needed to keep it at bay. Mr. Hong watched all this from a helicopter and said that he was very interested to see Hao's next steps. Hao threw the capsule containing the crystal high into the air to distract the monster. At that moment, Lu Feng ran past them with Sunju and jumped up. The monster tried with all its might to take possession of the crystal. The boy and girl just watched to see what would happen next. Before Lu Feng touched the capsule, a giant creature, shaped like a snake with a cross-shaped mouth, emerged from underground. The monster opened its mouth to swallow the crystal along with Lu Feng. The creature closed its jaws and looked down. Sunju stepped back a little and asked what kind of monster it was. Meanwhile, all headquarters forces were being pulled together at the Red Fog storage base. Youngshin's team was no exception. The man asked Jun, who was driving, why they needed to go there, but the guy himself only knew that they had discovered a secret room underneath. A few moments later, a giant monster emerged from underground. Youngshin was angry that they would be the ones to deal with this. The man kicked the car door open. Youngshin's main weapon was the monster's nuclear gloves, but they allowed him to fight such a creature. The man ordered Jun to take the reinforcements to the research room, and he, in turn, would deal with the monster. Taking advantage of the gauntlet's enhancement, Youngshin rushed towards the creature. Jun did not resist the order and moved on, leading the rest of the vehicles behind him. Yunsin approached the target and tried to understand what had happened. Meanwhile, Sunju stepped back and said that it was the first time she had seen a monster of such size. Hao said that monsters seemed to be attracted to things like that crystal. After absorbing the crystal, the creature gained a new purpose. In front of him he saw two people, from whom energy of varying strength emanated. The monster chose Hao as its first target, and then rushed at him with its mouth wide open. The boy activated his beast enhancement and transformed his hands into clawed paws. Hao jumped to the side, delivering a glancing blow to the monster's body. Having lost control of such a huge body, the creature stepped aside. Sunju and Hao spent a lot of effort just to avoid the monster's body that was trying to crush them. The guy looked at the monster and said that his attack didn't even leave a scratch, after which Sunju said that they couldn't handle it, so they needed to retreat. Hao said that the monster was interested in him, so he should act as a distraction while the rest of the soldiers evacuated the Red Mist storage base. Sunju said that she would not leave the boy to fight this creature alone. However, Hao ignored the girl and tried to move aside to prevent the monster from destroying the evidence. Sunju called the guy, but he didn't respond. Meanwhile, in the lab, Jinying was trying to figure out how to safely disconnect the subjects from life support. The girl discovered that, in addition to the life detection system, the rest of the data had been destroyed. Jinying looked at the unconscious Ashu and said that he was very lucky to have met a real master. At this moment, Jun, who had brought reinforcements, burst into the room, but was very surprised to see Captain Jia there. The man was glad to see his former subordinate, and said that it was Hao who saved him. A man named Hante approached Wei and said that now the commander-in-chief was Yongxing, and they had come to help Captain Sunju. Wei said that Sunju had given orders to guard this facility, and then asked where his brother was now. Meanwhile, the battle between Hao and the giant monster continued. The guy activated his invisibility ability and rushed towards the creature's head. However, the snake felt his energy and tried to grab him with its horns. Hao managed to react in time and jump higher. The monster began to look around, trying to find its target. At that moment, Hao landed on his head and punched him in the eye. The guy used the ability of the poison gland and began to strike the monster's eye, trying to blind it. A few moments later, the monster's long tongue wrapped around Hao and pulled him off his head. The creature opened its cross-shaped mouth wide, preparing to swallow the boy. Sunju concentrated electromagnetic energy in her fingers and directed it at the monster. A bolt of lightning flew into the creature like a bullet and cut off its tongue. After that, Sunju fell to the ground, exhausted, thinking that only Hao could use superpowers like this without a conductor. The monster got angry and turned his attention to the girl. Hao saw this and tried to run to Sunju before the creature, but he clearly didn't have time. At that moment, something crashed into the monster, creating a large explosion. In an instant, Yunqing was between the boy and girl and the monster and asked if they were okay. Sunju and Hao relaxed a little when they saw the man. The girl tried to say that this monster was too strong for them. Yunqing was an A-rank warrior and had flame superpowers, so he said they could leave it to him. The next moment, the man concentrated his power in the glove and delivered another blow to the monster, causing an explosion of unprecedented proportions. Sunju and Hao could only watch from the sidelines. The guy said that the power level of rank A is really impressive. Sunju couldn't take her eyes off the flame, so she didn't answer him. The monster was engulfed in flames and writhing in pain. However, after a few moments he howled and the flames receded. Yunqing maintained the complete calm characteristic of a commander-in-chief. The man concentrated his strength in the glove and said that it would not be so easy.